The ship arrived at the Grey Havens on a morning wrapped in mist, when the world seemed caught between waking and dreaming. It was the sort of morning when even the gulls flew quietly, as if aware that something of importance was taking place. Olorin, though he would soon be known by another name, stood at the prow of the white vessel and felt, for the first time in his long existence, the weight of bone and sinew. It was most peculiar. In the blessed realm, he had moved as thought moves, swift and unburdened. But here, in this mortal form the valor had clothed him in, every step required intention. Every breath was a small labor. He looked down at his hands, weathered, lined with years he had not lived, spotted with age he had not earned. The gray beard that hung to his chest was equally disconcerting. He had been given the form of an old man, though he was new to this world. It seemed a cruel jest, but he understood the wisdom in it. The folk of Middle-earth would more readily trust an elder than a youth. Age here meant experience, though at this moment Olorin felt he had precious little of that. The ship touched the stone pier with barely a whisper, and Círdan the shipwright himself was there to greet it. The Lord of the Havens was tall and gray-eyed, his beard longer even than Olorin's, and in his face was written the sorrow and wisdom of ages beyond counting. "Welcome, Olorin," Círdan said, his voice like the tide, ancient and patient. "Long have we awaited your coming." "I am glad to be here," Olorin replied, and found that his new voice surprised him, deep and creaking, like an old door in need of oil. He stepped onto the pier and immediately stumbled, his legs unaccustomed to solid ground. Or perhaps it was solid ground that was unaccustomed to him. Círdan steadied him with a gentle hand. "The body will take time to master. Walk slowly. There is no haste in Middle-earth that cannot wait for one to find his footing." "Wise counsel," Olorin said, though he felt profoundly foolish. He, who had walked in the gardens of Lorien and climbed the slopes of Tanicatil, now struggled to manage a simple dock. Círdan led him away from the harbor, through paths lined with birch and alder, to a quiet grove where a fallen log provided a natural seat. The mist was beginning to lift, and shafts of golden morning light broke through the trees. "Rest here," Círdan said. "I will return shortly. There is something I must give you, but first you must settle into this new form, feel the world, learn its weight and measure." Olorin nodded and lowered himself onto the log with the careful attention of one learning a new skill, which he supposed he was. Sitting. Such a simple thing, yet it required balance and the slight complaint of joints. When he was settled, Círdan departed, and Olorin was left alone with the morning. He closed his eyes and tried to sense Middle-earth as he once had, tried to hear the music that underlay all things, the echoes of the great song that had shaped creation. But it was muffled now, distant, like listening to music played in another room. His mortal ears heard only wind in leaves, the distant cry of gulls, the rustle of a sneeze. Olorin's eyes snapped open. He looked around but saw nothing. Perhaps he had imagined it. These new senses were still strange to him, still unreliable. Another sneeze. Definitely real, and very close. He leaned forward carefully and peered beneath the log. Two small, beady eyes stared back at him from a ball of spines. "Oh," Olorin said. The hedgehog sneezed again, a remarkably loud sound for such a small creature, and emerged from beneath the log with all the dignity of one whose nap has been rudely interrupted. "Do you mind?" the hedgehog said, or at least that was what Olorin understood. The actual sound was a series of snuffles and grumbles, but the meaning was clear. "Some of us were trying to sleep." Olorin blinked. He had not expected the small creatures of this world to speak, or perhaps they did not, and his new ears heard differently than mortal ones. "I apologize," he said gravely. "I did not know this log was occupied." The hedgehog regarded him with the suspicious air of one who is frequently overlooked and never sufficiently apologized to. It was a small creature, scarcely larger than an apple, with a coat of brown and gray spines and a pink snout that twitched with disapproval. "Well, now you know," the hedgehog said. "Next time, check before sitting, common courtesy." "I shall remember," Olorin promised. The hedgehog snorted, or perhaps it was another sneeze, and began poking about in the leaf litter, clearly searching for something. "Have you seen any beetles?" it asked without looking up. "Large ones, black preferably. The brown ones taste of dirt." "I have not," Olorin admitted. "I have only just arrived." "Arrived from where?" "From very far away." The hedgehog paused in its searching and looked up at him properly for the first time. "You talk oddly, and you smell of salt and stars. Are you an elf?" "No, I am—" Olorin hesitated. How did one explain to a hedgehog that one was a Maya, sent by the Valar to kindle hearts against the coming darkness? "I am a wizard." "A what?" "A wizard, one who works with magic." The hedgehog's expression suggested this was the most useless occupation it had ever heard of. "Can you magic up beetles?" "I do not think so." "Then what good are you?" It was an excellent question, and one Olorin had been asking himself since accepting this mission. "I am here to help," he said finally, "to offer counsel, to stand against the shadow that grows in the east." "Sounds complicated," the hedgehog said. "I mostly just eat beetles and sleep. Much simpler." Despite himself, Olorin smiled. "Perhaps, but it sounds like a good life nonetheless." "It is." The hedgehog returned to its searching. "Until wizards sit on your house." "Again, I apologize." They fell into a companionable silence, the old man who was new to the world, and the small creature who was perfectly at home in it. Olorin found himself watching the hedgehog with interest. There was something deeply reassuring about its simple concerns, its focus on the immediate and practical. Beetles and sleep. Not war, not destiny, not the weight of ages, just beetles and sleep. "What is your name?" Olorin asked. The hedgehog paused. "Don't have one, never needed one. Hedgehogs don't tend to introduce themselves formally. Would you like one? A name?" The creature considered this. "Suppose it depends. What were you thinking?" Olorin looked at the hedgehog, at its coat of spines like a tiny bramble bush, at its persistent prickly dignity. "Bramble," he said. "It seems fitting." The hedgehog, Bramble, tested the name silently, its snout twitching. "Bramble, Bramble. Yes, I like that. Has a solid sound to it. Respectable. I'm glad you approve. What's yours?" "Mine?" "Your name. If I'm going to have one, it's only fair you share yours." "I am called Olorin, though I think in this land I will be known as—" He paused. The name had been given to him before he departed, but he had not yet spoken it aloud. "Gandalf." "Gandalf." Bramble pronounced it carefully. "Strange name. What does it mean?" "Elf of the wand, I am told, though I am not an elf and I have no wand." "Very confusing. Wizards should have more straightforward names, like Bramble." "I shall keep that in mind." A rustling in the trees announced Cairdin's return. The elf lord appeared through the morning mist, bearing something wrapped in cloth. Bramble, upon seeing the tall figure approach, immediately scrambled toward Gandalf and, with surprising speed, climbed up the wizard's gray robes to perch on his shoulder. "What are you doing?" Gandalf asked, startled by the sudden weight and the prickling of small claws. Big folk make me nervous, Bramble muttered near his ear. You're big too, but you sat on my house, so now you're responsible for me. That's the rule. I'm not certain that's actually... Olorin? Círdan had reached them and was regarding the wizard with an expression of mild curiosity. Have you acquired a companion? It appears so, Gandalf said, though I'm not entirely sure how it happened. You sat on my house, Bramble explained to Círdan, though the elf likely heard only hedgehog sounds. Now I'm his responsibility. Hedgehogs have very firm ideas about property rights, Gandalf translated, though he wasn't certain Círdan needed the explanation. The shipwright smiled, a rare thing, but genuine. Then he has chosen well. A wizard should not walk alone in Middle-earth, even if his companion is small and prickly. I am not prickly, Bramble protested. I am appropriately defended. Gandalf winced as the hedgehog's emphasis involved a bristling of spines that poked through his hat. Perhaps we could discuss your defensive measures later, he suggested gently. Círdan unwrapped the cloth he carried, revealing a small wooden box. But I have not come to discuss hedgehogs, wise though they may be. I have come to give you this. He opened the box, and inside, resting on a cushion of dark velvet, was a ring. It was a simple thing at first glance, a band of gold, unadorned, catching the morning light. But Gandalf's new eyes, limited though they were, could still perceive the power that dwelt within it, like a small sun, contained and controlled, waiting to kindle. This is Narya, Círdan said softly, the ring of fire. It was entrusted to me long ago in days so dark that even the stars seemed to dim. I have borne it through ages of waiting, but now the waiting is done. You have come, and the need is great. This ring will serve you better than it has served me. He lifted the ring from its resting place and held it out. Gandalf stared at it, feeling the weight of more than gold. This was a ring of power, forged in elder days, bearing within it the strength to kindle hearts, to inspire courage, to warm hope in the coldest darkness. I am not certain I am worthy of such a gift, he said quietly. None who are truly worthy ever are certain, Círdan replied. That is part of what makes them worthy. Take it, Olorin called Gandalf. You will have need of it ere the end. With hands that trembled slightly, from age or apprehension he could not say, Gandalf took the ring and slipped it onto his finger. Warmth flooded through him. Not the burning heat of flame, but something gentler. The warmth of a hearth in winter, the warmth of companionship in dark places, the warmth of hope when all seems lost. Thank you, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion he was still learning to name. Círdan bowed his head. Use it well, and remember, it will not make you mighty in battle or terrible to behold. That is not its purpose. It kindles the fire in hearts, not in the hand. Use it to give others strength, and you will find your own. With that, the shipwright departed, leaving Gandalf alone with his new gift and his prickly companion. Bramble, who had been remarkably quiet during the exchange, now leaned forward from Gandalf's shoulder to peer at the ring. Can you eat it? He asked. No. Can you magic up beetles with it? I don't think so, Bramble snorted. Then what good is it? Gandalf looked at the ring on his finger, at the small sun contained in gold, and smiled despite himself. I suppose, he said, we shall have to find out. And with that, the Grey Wanderer, newly named, newly embodied, and newly accompanied, took his first steps into the long road that would become his legend. Behind them, the Grey Havens slowly disappeared into mist. Ahead, Middle-earth waited, vast and strange and full of purpose. And on Gandalf's shoulder, Bramble the Hedgehog was already wondering where his next meal would come from. Some things, after all, never changed, even when everything else did. The road eastward from the Grey Havens was old and well kept, lined with stone markers bearing elvish script that Gandalf could read but Bramble could not, and, more importantly, did not care to. The morning had ripened into afternoon, warm and golden, and the wizard found himself taking curious pleasure in small things he had never noticed before. The way dust motes danced in sunbeams, the particular creak of his staff against stone, the persistent grumbling of a hedgehog who had decided that his shoulder was the ideal vantage point for surveying the world. "Are we there yet?" Bramble asked for the fourth time in as many minutes. "We have no particular there to reach," Gandalf replied patiently. "We are simply walking. Walking requires energy. Energy requires food. I haven't eaten since breakfast. That was less than an hour ago. I watched you consume an entire beetle. That was an appetizer. A hedgehog cannot sustain himself on a single beetle. It's not done." Gandalf sighed. A curiously satisfying action in this new body, he discovered. "Perhaps we could stop for a meal when we reach the next grove." "The next grove?" Bramble's voice rose in pitch. "There's a perfectly good grove right there." He pointed with his snout toward a cluster of trees some 20 paces ahead. "That's barely 4 trees. It's arboreal. That makes it a grove. I don't make the rules." "I'm beginning to suspect you do, actually." But Gandalf obligingly turned toward the small copse, because in truth his new legs were already tired, and the thought of rest was appealing. He was beginning to understand why mortals spent so much time sitting down. The grove proved to contain a convenient fallen log, which Bramble immediately inspected for beetles, and a patch of grass that seemed designed for an old wizard to lower himself onto with as much dignity as he could muster while his knees complained. Gandalf settled himself, removed his pointed hat, and ran his fingers through his gray hair. It was still strange, this weight of years he had not lived. Strange, but not entirely unpleasant. There was something grounding about it, something that connected him to this Middle-earth in a way his previous, formless existence had not. "Found one," Bramble announced triumphantly, emerging from the log with a beetle held gently in his teeth. He set it down, looked at it critically, then looked up at Gandalf. "You're sure you don't want any?" "Quite sure, thank you." "Suit yourself. More for me." While Bramble conducted his meal with small sounds of satisfaction, Gandalf lifted his hand and looked at Narya. The ring caught the afternoon light, seeming to hold it, to treasure it. He could feel its power, subtle, patient, waiting. It did not call to him or demand use. It simply was, ready when needed. But how did one use such a thing? In his former life, working wonders had been as natural as breathing, which, come to think of it, he'd never had to do before. But now, wrapped in flesh and bone, separated from the direct apprehension of the music, everything was filtered through these clumsy mortal senses. He focused on the ring, trying to kindle even a small flame. A simple thing. He had seen it done countless times in Valinor. But here, in this heavy body, with these uncertain hands, a spark appeared above his palm. It flickered, grew slightly, then popped out of existence with a small sound like a disappointed sigh. Bramble looked up from his beetle. What was that? An attempt at fire. Did it work? Briefly. Doesn't sound very effective. I am still learning. Gandalf frowned at his hand. This body does not respond as I expected. It's like trying to speak a language you once knew fluently but have forgotten the grammar of. Sounds frustrating. It is. Bramble finished his beetle and waddled over to sit beside Gandalf. Can I see the ring? Gandalf held out his hand obligingly, and Bramble stood on his hind legs to peer at Narya more closely. It's very shiny, the hedgehog said, after careful consideration, but I still don't see the point of it. You can't eat it, can't build a nest with it, can't even use it to dig for grubs. Its purpose is less tangible. Intangible things are generally useless, present company excluded. Despite his frustration, Gandalf smiled. You're very practical, aren't you? Someone has to be. You wizards are all up in the clouds. Oh, I'm going to walk Middle-earth and kindle hope. What does that even mean? Hope doesn't fill bellies, doesn't it? Gandalf looked at the ring thoughtfully. I wonder. Hope might not be food, but it gives strength to find food, to plant crops, to endure winter knowing spring will come. Perhaps hope is the most practical thing of all. Bramble considered this. That's actually not a terrible point for a wizard. High praise indeed. Don't let it go to your head, which I should mention makes an excellent nest. Your hat, I mean. It's roomy. I'm not certain. Already decided. I'll sleep there tonight. You're too tall to walk on, and your pockets smell of pipeweed. How do you even know? Hedgehogs have excellent noses. It's our thing. Well, that and finding beetles. Gandalf shook his head in bemusement. In all his long years, in all his imaginings of what walking mortal would be like, he had never anticipated a hedgehog companion with strong opinions about hat-based sleeping arrangements. They rested for a while longer, Bramble hunting for additional beetles. He found 2, both apparently of acceptable quality, while Gandalf practiced small magics. The sparks came more easily with repetition, and by the time the sun had begun its descent toward evening, he had managed a small, sustained flame above his palm. It lasted nearly 3 seconds before winking out. Better, Bramble observed. Still not especially impressive, but better. Rome wasn't built in a day. What's Rome? Actually, I'm not certain, but the phrase seems appropriate. As the shadows lengthened, they resumed their journey. Gandalf found a walking rhythm that suited his new legs, a steady pace that covered ground without exhausting him. Bramble settled into the brim of his hat, peering out at the world with the air of a ship's captain surveying the sea. "Why are you here?" the hedgehog asked as they walked. "Really, I mean, you said something about shadow in the east, but that's very vague." Gandalf was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. Finally he said, "There is an evil in this world, old, patient, and growing stronger. Left unchecked, it will spread until all light is consumed. I am here to stand against it, to help those who cannot help themselves." That sounds very noble. It feels very uncertain. Because you're new to the body? Because I'm new to everything. In Valinor I was not as I am now. I could see more clearly, act more directly. Here, I am limited, mortal in all but actual death, and I wonder if I am truly the right choice for such a task. Bramble was quiet for a long moment. Then, the elf who gave you the ring seemed to think so. Círdan is very wise. Then trust his wisdom, and if all else fails, at least you have me. And what will you do against ancient evil? Poke it with my spines, very effective spines, and if that doesn't work, I'll find its beetle stash and eat it all. Nothing demoralizes evil quite like a depleted beetle supply. Gandalf laughed, a sound that surprised him with its fullness, its genuine pleasure. You know, Bramble, I think you might be exactly the companion I need. Obviously, I'm excellent. They walked on into the evening, an old wizard and a self-confident hedgehog, following a road that had no particular destination but would, in time, lead to all the right places. Above them, the first stars began to appear, Elbereth's lights, kindled long ago, still shining. Gandalf looked up at them and felt a pang of homesickness, but it was gentler than he'd expected. because he was not alone. He had a ring of power, a mission of purpose, and a hedgehog in his hat. It was, he reflected, a very strange beginning to a very long road. But then, the best beginnings usually were. 3 days had passed since they left the Grey Havens, and Gandalf was beginning to feel he might actually master this business of being mortal. His legs no longer protested quite so loudly at each day's walking. His hands had learned to grip his staff with the right amount of pressure. And he'd managed, just that morning, to light his pipe on the first try with a small flame conjured from Narya. Bramble had been unimpressed. "Still can't magic up beetles, though, can you?" But Gandalf chose to consider it progress nonetheless. They were following the east road through pleasant country, rolling hills dotted with copses of birch and oak, small streams that sparkled in the summer sunlight, meadows bright with flowers whose names Gandalf was slowly learning. It was the sort of landscape that seemed designed to ease worry and encourage whistling, which made what happened next all the more jarring. They had stopped for lunch, bread and cheese for Gandalf, an impressive collection of insects for Bramble, in a meadow that sloped gently down toward a stream. The day was warm, perhaps the warmest since Gandalf's arrival, and he had removed his cloak and hat, allowing Bramble to hunt freely while he sat in the grass and attempted to blow smoke rings. He was not very good at it yet. The rings came out more like smoke blobs, but it was pleasant to try. "Gandalf," Bramble said suddenly, his small voice sharp with concern. Look at the sky." Gandalf looked up, and his half-formed smoke ring dissolved into shapeless gray. The sky to the north had changed. Where moments before there had been clear summer blue, now there was a wall of cloud, dark, roiling, advancing with unnatural speed. As he watched, the temperature began to drop, noticeably, rapidly. "That's not right," Bramble said, hurrying toward Gandalf with unusual haste. "That's very not right. It's summer. Summer doesn't do that." Gandalf stood, reaching for his cloak. "No, it doesn't." The wind hit them then, bitter, sharp, carrying sleet that stung exposed skin. The temperature plummeted as if winter had arrived in the space of a heartbeat. The grass around them began to frost, the flowers wilting under the sudden assault of cold. "This is magic," Gandalf said, raising his voice over the rising wind. "Dark magic. Something is—" A gust nearly knocked him from his feet. He steadied himself with his staff, but his fingers were already going numb. Bramble scrambled up his robes with remarkable speed and dove into the nearest available shelter, which happened to be Gandalf's pocket. "Do something," the hedgehog's muffled voice called. "Wizard something. This is what wizards are for." "I'm trying." Gandalf looked around desperately. They were exposed here in the open meadow with no shelter nearby. The stream had already begun to ice over. If this continued, they would freeze. He needed fire, warmth, the ring. Narya could help, surely. That was its purpose. Kindling flame in dark places. Gandalf focused on the ring, trying to recall the sensation from this morning when he'd lit his pipe. The warmth, the spark, the small success. But his hands were shaking now, from cold or fear or both, and concentration came hard. A tiny flame appeared above his palm, and immediately blew out. "That's not helping," Bramble called from the pocket. "I'm aware." Gandalf tried again. Another spark, another failure. The sleet was coming harder now, mixed with snow, actual snow, in the height of summer. His beard was beginning to frost. His fingers felt like wood. "Focus," he told himself. "You are Olorin. You have walked in fire and light. You have counseled elves and conversed with eagles. You can manage one simple flame." He raised his hand again, calling to the ring, to the power within it. Narya warmed on his finger. He could feel it, even through the numbing cold. The ring wanted to help. It was ready, but Gandalf's new body, his uncertain grasp of its limitations and possibilities, betrayed him. The flame that appeared this time was larger, too large, and completely out of control. It flared bright orange, then green, then shot upward like a tiny firework before exploding in a shower of sparks that singed his eyebrows and set his hat smoking. "My house!" Bramble shrieked from the pocket. "You're burning my house!" Gandalf quickly beat out the smoldering spots on his hat, while simultaneously trying to maintain any sort of magical focus, which resulted in him hopping on one foot, swatting at his head, and making small distressed noises that were most undignified for a wizard. The blizzard, meanwhile, intensified. Within minutes, the entire meadow was white. The stream was solid ice. The trees at the meadow's edge groaned under sudden snow weight, and Gandalf, for all his ancient wisdom and divine origin, could not manage one useful flame. "We need shelter," he shouted over the wind. "The trees, if we can reach the trees." He began moving, but the snow was already deep enough to make walking difficult, and his robes were heavy with ice. Bramble clung to the inside of his pocket, a small warm weight that was, at least, proof that someone was having worse luck than the hedgehog at the moment. They'd nearly reached the tree line when Gandalf's foot caught on something buried in the snow, a root perhaps or a stone, and he went down hard, landing face first in a drift. For a moment, he simply lay there, tasting snow and defeat in equal measure. This was humiliating. He was a Maya. He had been sent by the Valar themselves to stand against the darkness, and he couldn't even walk through a meadow without falling over. "Gandalf," Bramble's voice was small and worried. "Are you all right?" "No," Gandalf said into the snow. "I am very much not all right. I am cold, I am frustrated, and I appear to be completely useless." "You're not useless. You're just having a difficult day." "That's a charitable interpretation." "Well, I'm a charitable hedgehog." Bramble poked his head out of the pocket, his small nose twitching. "But we really should get moving. I can't feel my feet anymore." "You can't feel—" Gandalf pushed himself up in alarm. "Bramble, you're tiny. You'll freeze." "I'm aware of my size, thank you. Now get up and find us shelter before we both become decorative ice sculptures." Gandalf struggled to his feet, gathered what remained of his dignity, and pushed forward. The trees, when they reached them, provided some relief from the wind, but little from the cold. Snow was still falling heavily, and the temperature continued to drop. He tried the ring again, more carefully this time. A small flame, just enough to warm his hands. Nothing fancy. The spark appeared, flickered, and died. "Oh, for—" Gandalf nearly threw his staff in frustration but caught himself. Breaking his only walking aid seemed counterproductive. "Here," Bramble said, emerging from the pocket despite the cold. He began gathering small twigs and dry bark from the sheltered base of a tree. Sometimes the simple way is best. Make a fire the old way, then use your ring to keep it going. "The old way," Gandalf repeated, watching the hedgehog work with small, efficient movements. "You mean without magic?" Shocking concept, I know. But yes, wood, spark, fire, it's not complicated. Feeling somewhat foolish, Gandalf helped gather kindling, scraping away snow to find dry material beneath. When they had a small pile, he struck his staff against a stone, hoping the impact would generate sparks. It did not. He tried flint and steel from his pack. His numb fingers dropped the flint 3 times, and when he finally managed to strike them together, the sparks scattered uselessly into the snow. "This is harder than it looks," he muttered. "Most things are," Bramble said, trying to help by holding down a particularly stubborn piece of bark. "Try again. You're a wizard. You're supposed to be wise and patient." "I'm supposed to be many things. Currently, I'm mostly cold and incompetent. Self-pity doesn't generate warmth. Try again. Gandalf tried again. And again. His hands were shaking so badly that the flint and steel clicked together more by accident than design. But finally, a spark caught on the dried bark. A tiny orange glow, barely visible. "There!" Bramble said excitedly. "That's it! Blow on it! Gently!" Gandalf bent close and blew softly, coaxing the ember. It grew, spread, and with careful addition of twigs became actual flame. Small, modest, but real. "I did it," Gandalf said, slightly amazed. "Without magic, just fire." "Sometimes the simple way is the right way," Bramble said, moving close to the flames with obvious relief. "Now use your ring. Make it stronger." This time, when Gandalf focused on Narya, he didn't try to create fire from nothing. He simply tried to encourage what was already there, to kindle what had been kindled. The ring understood that. The ring had been made for that. The flames grew, not explosively, not wildly, but with steady warmth that pushed back the cold. Gandalf added more wood, and the fire strengthened, becoming a small beacon of light and heat in the winter-struck forest. He and Bramble huddled close to it, feeling gradually return to frozen extremities. "That was terrible," Bramble said after a while. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend." "Agreed." Gandalf looked up through the trees at the still swirling snow. "But this storm, this isn't natural. Something caused it. Something magical. Something dark. This has the feel of deliberate malice, as if—" He trailed off, frowning. "As if something is announcing its presence, making itself known." "That's a very dramatic way to introduce yourself. Whatever it is has poor social skills." "Despite everything," Gandalf smiled, "I suppose you're right." They stayed by the fire for several hours, waiting for the unnatural blizzard to pass. Gandalf practiced with the ring, learning to maintain the flames, to keep them steady. It was like learning to use a new tool, awkward at first, but gradually more natural. Bramble, for his part, dozed fitfully, occasionally waking to complain about the cold or ask if Gandalf had any food besides bread. He did not, much to the hedgehog's disappointment. Eventually, as evening approached, the snow began to lessen. The wind dropped, and the temperature, while still far colder than it should have been in summer, at least stopped its precipitous decline. "I think it's passing," Gandalf said, looking up at the clearing sky. "Good. I hate winter. It's the worst season. No beetles, no warmth, just suffering and cold feet." "I'm inclined to agree with you." They let the fire burn down to coals, then set out again, moving carefully through the snow-transformed landscape. The road was buried, but Gandalf had a good sense of direction, one skill at least that had translated well from his former existence. As they walked through the white silence, Bramble spoke up. "You did well back there, with the fire." "I fell on my face and couldn't manage a simple spell." "Yes, but then you tried the other way, and you kept trying until it worked. That's not nothing." Gandalf was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Bramble." "You're welcome. Can we find somewhere warm to sleep tonight? Preferably somewhere with beetles?" "I'll do my best." They trudged on through the snow, leaving small tracks, wizard-sized and hedgehog-sized, in their wake. Behind them, the fire they'd kindled slowly burned out, but the warmth they'd created, the small victory against unnatural cold that remained. It wasn't much, but it was something, and in the darkness that was coming, Gandalf was learning. Sometimes something was all you needed, just enough warmth to survive the night, just enough courage to try again tomorrow, just enough to keep walking, even when everything felt cold and impossible and strange. You kept walking, because that was what you did. And if you had a hedgehog in your pocket complaining about the temperature, well, that helped too. More than you might think, morning came reluctantly, as if uncertain whether it wanted to face what the night had wrought. The world was white and silent, buried under snow that had no business being there in the middle of summer. The trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches bowed under unnatural weight. Gandalf woke stiff and cold, despite having kept a small fire burning through the night. Every joint complained when he moved, and his beard had frozen to his cloak in 3 places, which required some careful thawing before he could sit up properly. "This is miserable," he muttered, carefully separating beard from fabric. From somewhere within his robes came a muffled voice. "Agreed. Can we go somewhere warm now?" "Anywhere warm. I'm not particular." Gandalf reached into the pocket where Bramble had been sleeping and carefully extracted the hedgehog, who had curled into the tightest ball possible, his spines pressed flat to conserve warmth. "I'm afraid warm is in short supply at the moment," Gandalf said. "But we should keep moving. Staying still will only make us colder." "I hate winter," Bramble grumbled as Gandalf set him on a snow-cleared stone to wake up properly. "I hate it with a passion that cannot be adequately expressed in words. It's not supposed to be winter. That makes it worse." They broke their fast with the last of Gandalf's bread, now frozen solid and requiring careful thawing by the fire, and whatever insects Bramble could find beneath the snow, which according to the hedgehog were of notably inferior quality, frozen and confused. As they prepared to continue their journey, Bramble looked up at Gandalf with an expression that was hard to read on a hedgehog face, but seemed to convey serious intent. "I need to discuss accommodation," he said. "Accommodation? Your pocket is adequate for brief journeys, but for extended winter survival, I require something more substantial, with better insulation, and preferably elevated for scouting purposes." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Bramble pointed with his snout. "The hat." Gandalf looked at his pointed gray hat, currently sitting on a rock where he'd left it to dry from the previous day's snow. "My hat. It's perfect. Roomy. Good visibility. Already broken in. Bramble, I can't carry you in my hat. It's a wizard's hat. It has dignity." "Dignity doesn't keep hedgehogs from freezing. The hat has space. I'm small. This is basic geometry." "That's not how—" "I'm going in the hat." "Bramble!" But the hedgehog was already waddling toward the hat with determination. He inspected it carefully, walking around its circumference, then climbed inside. After a moment, his small face appeared in the brim, looking remarkably pleased. "Yes, this is acceptable. Good headroom. Excellent brim architecture. I approve." "I didn't ask for your approval," Gandalf said, though he could feel his resolve weakening. The hedgehog did look rather cold. "Too late. I've already moved in. Possession is 9/10 of the law." "I don't think that applies to hats." "It applies to everything. I don't make the rules." "You absolutely make up rules as you go along." "Prove it." Gandalf sighed, an action he was finding increasingly familiar, and picked up the hat. Bramble settled into the deep point of it with a contented sound, his small face just visible if you looked straight up into the brim. "See?" the hedgehog said. "Perfect. You can't even tell I'm here." "I can absolutely tell you're here. There's a hedgehog in my hat." Details. Gandalf placed the hat on his head with some trepidation. Bramble's weight was barely noticeable, but the idea of walking through Middle-earth with a hedgehog riding in his headwear seemed to undermine whatever gravitas he was supposed to be cultivating as a wizard. "If anyone asks," he started. "No one will ask. Who looks up into a wizard's hat? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. I'm invisible. I'm a secret weapon. Also, it's warm up here. Your head generates excellent heat. My head. Gandalf shook his head, which made Bramble squeak in protest. This is absurd. This is practical. There's a difference. Now walk. I want to find a warm village with a good beetle supply before nightfall. With considerable misgivings but limited alternatives, Gandalf gathered his staff and set off through the snow. The road was still buried, but he could follow its general direction by the lay of the land. The going was slow and difficult, his robes heavy with accumulated ice, his staff sinking deep with each step. From his hat, Bramble provided running commentary. Left a bit. There's a drift. I can see the drift. Just being helpful. Your definition of helpful is questionable. Tree branch. 2 o'clock. I'm aware. Duck. Gandalf ducked just in time to avoid a low-hanging branch heavy with snow. Thank you. See? Helpful. They traveled through the morning, the strange summer snow continuing to fall in light flurries. The landscape had become alien, familiar summer country transformed into a winter wonderland that felt deeply wrong. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind was quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Around midday, they spotted smoke in the distance. Chimney, Bramble announced from his elevated position. Signs of civilization, and where there's civilization, there's food. And possibly people who might wonder about a wizard with a hedgehog in his hat, Gandalf pointed out. I told you I'm invisible. A secret, your head-based companion of mystery. That doesn't make it sound better. As they approached, the smoke resolved into several chimneys belonging to a small cluster of buildings. A way station, perhaps, or a small hamlet. People moved between the buildings, their breaths frosting in the cold air, all of them wrapped in whatever winter clothes they'd been able to scramble together. Should I hide? Bramble asked, his voice slightly more serious now. That might be wise. In your pocket? No, stay in the hat. Just try to be quiet and still. I'm always quiet and still. You are literally neither of those things ever. Hurtful, but I'll try. Gandalf approached the settlement cautiously. Several people noticed him, an old wizard in gray robes appearing out of the snow like a character from a story, and a small group gathered as he reached the outskirts. Greetings, Gandalf said, raising his staff in what he hoped was a friendly manner. I am Gandalf, a traveler. I seek shelter from this unseasonable weather. A woman stepped forward, middle-aged, wrapped in shawls, her face lined with worry. You're welcome, stranger, though we've little comfort to offer. This unnatural winter has caught us unprepared. When did it begin? Yesterday morning. Clear summer sky one moment, then that. She gestured at the snow-heavy clouds. My grandmother spoke of such things in old tales. Dark magic, she called it. Signs of evil in the world. Gandalf nodded gravely. Your grandmother was wise. This is indeed. He was interrupted by a sneeze, a very small, very distinct sneeze, coming from inside his hat. Everyone stared at Gandalf's head. Was that? The woman began. The wind, Gandalf said quickly. It makes odd sounds in this weather. It sounded like it came from another sneeze, louder this time, and definitely, unmistakably from the hat. I have a cold, Gandalf tried desperately. The head cold, very common, makes one hear things. A small face appeared in the brim of the hat, nose twitching. Sorry, Bramble whispered. The snow in your hair made me. He sneezed again, directly into Gandalf's ear. The gathered villagers were now backing away slowly, their expressions shifting from welcome to alarm. Your hat, a man said, pointing with a shaking hand. Your hat has something in it. Ah, Gandalf said. Yes, about that. Bramble, apparently deciding that subtlety was no longer an option, climbed fully into view and perched on the brim of Gandalf's hat like a small, spiky crown. "Hello," he said cheerfully. "I'm Bramble. I live in the hat. It's very comfortable. Also, do you have any beetles? I'm famished." The villagers stared in stunned silence. Then, as one, they turned and ran. "Well," Bramble said, as they watched the people scatter to various buildings, doors slamming shut in rapid succession. "That went well." Gandalf removed his hat and looked up at the hedgehog. "I told you this was a bad idea. You told me no such thing. You said it lacked dignity, which is different. Besides, they were boring anyway. No sense of adventure." "Bramble, they were frightened." "Of what? I'm adorable." "You're a talking hedgehog emerging from a wizard's hat. That's not adorable. That's deeply alarming to normal folk. Their problem, not mine. Also, I really do need to sneeze again. Something about the cold air and— Don't. Your dandruff— I don't have dandruff— is very irritating to my— Achoo! The sneeze was impressive in its volume, given Bramble's size. It echoed off the buildings, and Gandalf could see curtains twitching in windows as the frightened villagers peered out. "We should go," he said with a sigh. "Probably for the best. They clearly have no appreciation for interspecies cooperation." Gandalf placed his hat back on his head, Bramble scrambling inside with the ease of long practice, and turned to leave the settlement. As they departed, he called back to the shuttered buildings. "I apologize for any alarm. We mean you no harm. We're simply passing through." No response came save the wind and a distant door slamming shut. "You know," Bramble said as they trudged back into the snow, "I think we need to work on our people skills." "We? You. I meant you. I'm fine. It's you who needs work," says the hedgehog who lives in my hat. A perfectly reasonable living arrangement. The fact that others don't appreciate it shows their lack of imagination, not our lack of propriety. Gandalf couldn't help but laugh despite his embarrassment. "You have an answer for everything, don't you?" "Naturally. I'm very wise." "You're very something." They walked on through the snow, leaving the frightened village behind. Gandalf found he didn't entirely regret the incident. Yes, it had been embarrassing. Yes, his reputation as a dignified wizard had taken a blow. But Bramble's matter-of-fact acceptance of the situation, his complete lack of concern about what others thought, was oddly refreshing. Perhaps dignity was overrated. Perhaps walking through Middle-earth with a hedgehog in your hat was exactly the sort of thing a wizard should do. Unconventional, unexpected, but somehow right. "Bramble," he said after a while. "Yes, thank you." "For what?" "For being yourself, even when it complicates things." There was a pause. Then, "You're welcome. Also, I'm going to sneeze again." "Of course you are." "Achoo!" "Bless you." "Thank you. Being blessed is nice. Can we find food now?" "We can try. Good enough for me." And so they continued, an old wizard and a sneezing hedgehog, making their way through an impossible winter toward destinations unknown. Behind them, in the village, people slowly emerged from their homes and discussed, in hushed and wondering tones, the strange wizard whose hat had sneezed. The story would be told for years, growing stranger with each telling, until eventually no one quite remembered if it had been a hedgehog, a small demon, or a very confused sparrow. But they all agreed on one thing. Wizards were very odd indeed, and their hats, it seemed, even odder. 2 days of hard travel through snow that had no right to exist brought Gandalf and Bramble to the edge of a valley that should have been green with summer growth. Instead, it lay white and silent under a blanket of ice. "That looks bad," Bramble observed from his position in the hat. He'd become quite comfortable there, occasionally poking his head out to comment on their surroundings or point out hazards. That looks very bad. It does, Gandalf agreed grimly. At the valley's center stood a village, or what had been a village. Now it was more sculpture than settlement, every building encased in a shell of thick crystalline ice that caught the weak sunlight and threw it back in painful shards of light. The ice wasn't just on the buildings, it coated everything: trees, fences, wells. Even the road leading into the village gleamed with frozen malice. But worse than the ice was the silence. No smoke rose from chimneys, no sound of voices carried on the wind, no signs of life at all, save for shapes, human shapes, visible through the translucent ice, frozen mid-motion, like insects trapped in amber. Are they? Bramble's voice was uncharacteristically small. Alive, Gandalf said, because he could still sense it, the faint pulse of life beneath the magic. But trapped, frozen in some sort of stasis. They're not dead, but they're not truly living either. Can you help them? I don't know. The admission hurt. I should be able to. I was sent here to help, but I'm still so uncertain. This body, this magic. He looked at his hands, at the ring that should have been the answer to everything. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Well, Bramble said with forced cheerfulness, only one way to find out. They descended into the valley. The temperature dropped with every step until Gandalf's breath came in thick clouds and his beard was crusted with frost. Bramble retreated deeper into the hat, only his pink nose visible. The village was even worse up close. The ice was so thick that the buildings beneath were barely recognizable as human construction. And the people, Gandalf could see them clearly now. A woman reaching for a door, a man mid-step with an armful of firewood, children playing in what must have been the village green. All frozen, their faces captured in expressions of shock and terror. This is wrong, Gandalf said, his voice tight with emotion. This is deeply, terribly wrong. He approached the nearest frozen figure, the woman reaching for the door, and placed his hand against the ice encasing her. It was cold beyond cold, almost burning to touch, and beneath it he could feel the barest whisper of warmth. Life, holding on by the thinnest thread. Can you melt it? Bramble asked. I can try. Gandalf focused on Narya, on the warmth it held. He called to the ring, asking it to kindle heat, to push back this unnatural cold. The ring responded. Warmth flowed from it, down his arm, into his hand. The ice beneath his palm began to glisten with moisture. It was working. Then the ice seemed to resist, as if it were not merely frozen water but something with intent, something that wanted to keep its prisoners. The warmth Gandalf was generating was swallowed up, consumed by the malevolence embedded in the ice. He pushed harder, drawing more deeply on the ring's power. Sweat broke out on his forehead despite the cold. The ice cracked, just slightly, and for a moment hope surged. Then the crack sealed itself, and the ice spread up Gandalf's arm. Gandalf! Bramble's voice was sharp with alarm. Let go! But Gandalf couldn't. The ice had his hand now, creeping up his wrist, drawing the warmth from him, rather than the other way around. He pulled back, hard, and fell backward into the snow, his hand numb and blue. Bramble tumbled from the hat in his haste to check on his companion. Are you all right? No, Gandalf admitted, cradling his frozen hand. I'm not. Whatever magic holds this place, it's stronger than I am, or rather, stronger than I know how to be. He sat in the snow for a long moment, feeling defeated. All around him, the frozen village stood as testament to his inadequacy. He had been sent to Middle-earth as a guardian, a helper, a force against the darkness, but he couldn't even free one woman from magical ice. I don't know what to do, he said quietly. Bramble looked at him, then at the frozen village, then back. "Neither do I," he admitted. "I'm a hedgehog. My solutions to problems mostly involve hiding ore in gold and thought about warmth. Not just physical warmth, but the other kinds. The warmth of friendship, of kindness, of knowing someone cares." He thought about Bramble, loyal despite everything, about Círdan's gentle wisdom, about the morning sun on his face and the satisfaction of a well-lit pipe and the simple pleasure of a day's walking with good company. He thought about all the warmth in the world, gathering it in his mind like kindling for a fire. Then he raised his staff and his ringed hand, and he spoke, not words of power, but simple truth. "You are not alone. This darkness will pass. Hold on. Just a little longer. Help has come." The ring flared, not with heat, but with light. Soft, golden light that spread outward from Gandalf like dawn breaking. It didn't melt the ice. It did something more subtle. It reached through the ice, past the physical cold, to the trapped minds within, and it reminded them of warmth. Gandalf felt it, the faint stirring of response. The frozen people couldn't move, couldn't speak, but they heard him. They felt the light, and in their trapped spirits tiny flames of hope kindled. It wasn't enough to free them, not yet, but it was something, a beginning. When the light faded, Gandalf stood exhausted, leaning heavily on his staff. The village was still frozen, but something had changed. He could feel it. The ice had lost some of its malevolence. The cold was still there, but it was no longer absolute. "Did it work?" Bramble asked. "Not yet, but it's a start. They know they're not forgotten, that someone is trying to help. That has to count for something. What do we do now? We find out what caused this, and we stop it from spreading further." Gandalf looked to the north, where the valley rose toward snow-covered hills. The cold was strongest there. The source of this unnatural winter had to be in that direction. "Come on," he said, beginning to walk toward the hills. "We have work to do." Bramble scrambled back into the hat. "You know this is probably a trap, right? This feels like a trap." "Almost certainly. And we're walking into it anyway?" "Yes. Just checking. Wanted to make sure we were on the same page regarding our impending doom." "Duly noted." They left the frozen village behind, but Gandalf looked back once before it passed from sight. The people were still trapped, still frozen, but he had made them a promise. He would return. He would find a way to free them. He had to, because if he couldn't help one small village, how could he hope to stand against the darkness that threatened all of Middle-earth? The answer he knew lay ahead, in the cold, in whatever waited in those northern hills, and he would face it, with or without power, with or without certainty, because that's what you did when people needed help. You tried, even when you felt small and unsure and inadequate. You tried. And you kept trying until something worked, even if that something was just the smallest spark of hope in the darkest cold. Sometimes that was all you needed, a spark, to light the way forward. The morning after the frozen village broke cold and clear, the sky a pale blue that seemed to mock the snow-covered world below. Gandalf woke, stiff and sore, his joints protesting the night spent huddled beneath his cloak with only a small fire for warmth. Bramble emerged from the depths of the pointed hat where he'd burrowed for the night, looking disheveled and grumpy. "I had a terrible dream," the hedgehog announced. "I dreamed we were trapped in an eternal winter, and there were no beetles anywhere, and I had to live in a hat forever." "That wasn't a dream," Gandalf said gently. "That's our current situation. I hate our current situation, as do I." They broke their fast with the last of Gandalf's provisions, some rather stale bread and a piece of cheese that had frozen solid overnight. Bramble managed to find a few winter-dormant insects beneath the snow, which he consumed with the air of a food critic forced to review peasant fare. Frozen, confused, and probably past their prime, he said with a sniff. 2 stars out of 10. Your standards are remarkably high for someone who eats beetles. Quality matters, Gandalf, even in beetles, especially in beetles. As they prepared to continue north toward whatever was causing this unnatural winter, Gandalf found his thoughts returning to the frozen village, to the people trapped there, conscious but unable to move, aware but unable to act. He had kindled a small hope in them yesterday. He'd felt it, that tiny response to Narya's light. But hope alone wouldn't free them. They needed more. But what? You're brooding, Bramble observed as Gandalf picked him up and placed him in his customary position in the hat. Your forehead gets all wrinkly when you brood. I'm thinking. Brooding, definitely brooding. I'm considering our options. We have options. That's news to me. I thought our only option was walk north and hope we don't freeze. That's actually quite accurate. Gandalf sighed and began walking, his staff sinking deep into the snow with each step. I was sent here to help, to stand against the darkness. But I can't even help one village. What good is a wizard who can't work wonders? Maybe wonders aren't what they need. What do you mean? Bramble was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough that Gandalf actually stopped walking to make sure the hedgehog hadn't fallen asleep. I mean, Bramble said finally, that people don't need magic. They need kindness. Someone who cares. Someone who tries. You can't melt that ice. Not yet. But you went to them anyway. You spoke to them. You let them know they weren't forgotten. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Maybe nothing is ever enough. But you do what you can anyway. That's what makes it matter. Gandalf stood in the snow, feeling the weight of those words. When had the hedgehog become so wise? When did you become a philosopher, he asked. I've always been a philosopher. You just haven't been paying attention. Now walk. It's cold and standing still doesn't help anyone. They continued north, following a path that wasn't really a path, just a general direction toward the hills where the cold seemed strongest. The landscape had become increasingly barren as they traveled. What few trees remained were skeletal and frost-burned. No birds sang, no animals moved, just endless white silence. It was late afternoon when they came upon the child. At first, Gandalf thought it was another frozen victim, a small figure huddled against a snow-covered boulder. But as they approached, the figure moved, just slightly, a shiver that spoke of life, however tenuous. Gandalf, Bramble said urgently. There's someone there, someone alive. Gandalf hurried forward as quickly as the deep snow allowed. It was indeed a child, a boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes far too thin for this weather. His lips were blue, his face pale as the snow around him, but his eyes were open, watching Gandalf's approach with a mixture of hope and fear. Help, the boy whispered. Please. Gandalf dropped to his knees beside the child, removing his own cloak and wrapping it around the small, shivering form. Easy, lad, easy. I've got you. You're safe now. Cold, the boy managed through chattering teeth. So cold. I know. We'll get you warm. Just hold on. Gandalf looked around desperately for shelter, anywhere out of the wind, but there was nothing. Just open snow and that single boulder. Fire, Bramble said. You need to make a fire. Now. I know, but no buts. This child is dying. Make a fire. Gandalf's hands shook as he tried to gather what little dry material he could find. A few twigs sheltered by the boulder, some dead grass. But everything was frozen, and his earlier success with the flint and steel seemed impossibly far away. He struck the flint once, twice, 3 times. No spark caught. "Come on," Bramble urged. "You can do this. You did it before." "That was different. There wasn't a child dying, which is exactly why you need to do it now." Bramble had climbed out of the hat and was trying to arrange the kindling with his small paws. "Focus! You're a wizard! Act like one!" But Gandalf's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every strike of the flint felt clumsy, desperate. The child was growing quieter, his shivers less frequent. A bad sign. "Please," Gandalf whispered to the ring, to the Valar, to anyone who might be listening. "Please, I need help. I can't let him die. Not this child. Not like this." Narya warmed on his finger, but the warmth felt distant, unreachable. He was too panicked, too afraid. He couldn't focus, couldn't center himself. The magic that should have been natural, that he'd wielded for ages in his former life, now felt as foreign as this body, these hands, this helpless mortality. Beside him, Bramble had stopped trying to arrange kindling. The hedgehog was looking at the child, then at his own small paws, then at something in the snow nearby. "Gandalf," Bramble said quietly, "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Reach into your left pocket, the deep one." Mystified but desperate for anything that might help, Gandalf reached into his pocket. His fingers found something round and hard. Several somethings, actually. He pulled them out. Acorns. A small handful of acorns. "Bramble, now is not the time." "Those are mine," the hedgehog said. "My emergency supply. I've been collecting them since we left the Grey Havens. Was going to save them for winter, since beetles are scarce in the cold." "I don't understand." "Give them to the boy." "But give them to him." Bramble's voice was sharp. "He needs food. Something to give him strength. Something to remind him that food exists, that life exists, that things grow, and the world isn't all cold and death." Gandalf looked at the acorns, then at the semi-conscious child, then at Bramble. "These are your entire food supply, your security. I know what they are. Give them to the boy." "Bramble, do it!" With trembling hands, Gandalf pressed one of the acorns into the child's hand, then brought it to the boy's lips. "Here, lad, try to eat this, just a little. It will help." The child's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the acorn with confusion, then at Gandalf's face, and something in that old, kind face must have reassured him, because he put the acorn in his mouth and began to chew weakly. And something extraordinary happened. As the child ate, as this small act of sustenance, of life continuing despite all odds, took place, Narya blazed on Gandalf's finger, not with fire, not with heat, but with something else, with hope, with the reminder that even in the darkest cold, life persisted. Seeds remained. Spring would come again. The ring's warmth flowed through Gandalf, but this time it wasn't scattered or panicked. It was focused by the simple act of giving, of one small creature sacrificing its security to help another. Gandalf placed his hand on the child's chest, over his heart, and the warmth from the ring spread into the boy, not burning, just warming, kindling the spark of life that remained, fanning it gently back to strength. Color returned to the child's face. His breathing deepened, his shivering paradoxically increased. A good sign, Gandalf knew. The body shivering meant it had enough energy to fight the cold. "That's it," Gandalf murmured. "Come back, lad. Come back to us." The boy's eyes opened fully. He looked at Gandalf with wonder. You're warm, like summer." "Not quite summer," Gandalf said with a gentle smile, "but warmer than winter. Can you tell me your name?" "To Tam. My name is Tam." "Well, Tam, I'm Gandalf, and this—" He gestured to Bramble, who was trying to look dignified despite being a hedgehog standing in snow. "Is Bramble. We're here to help." The ice, Tam said, his voice growing stronger as warmth returned to his limbs. The ice came so fast. Everyone was frozen. I was in the field, away from the village. I ran, but the cold followed me. I thought I was going to die. You're not going to die, Gandalf said firmly. Not today. Can you stand? With Gandalf's help, Tam managed to get to his feet. He was still weak, still cold, but alive. Definitely alive. We need to get you somewhere warmer, Gandalf said. Is there shelter nearby? A farm? Another village? Tam pointed east with a shaking hand. My uncle's farm. 3 miles, maybe? If it's not frozen, too. Then that's where we'll go. Gandalf handed Tam another acorn. Eat this as we walk, small bites, it will help. They set out, Gandalf supporting Tam's weight, Bramble having climbed back into the hat to conserve his own energy. The going was slow. Tam was weak, and the snow was deep, but they made steady progress. As they walked, Gandalf found himself marveling at what had happened. He hadn't wielded great magic, hadn't called down fire from the sky or melted ice with a word of power. He'd just helped, given what he could. And Bramble had done the same, sacrificing his carefully hoarded food supply without hesitation. Bramble, Gandalf said quietly as they trudged through the snow. What you did back there, giving up your acorns, that was— Don't, Bramble interrupted. Don't make it into a thing. He needed them more than me, that's all. Simple arithmetic. It was more than arithmetic. It was kindness. It was practical. Can't let children freeze. Bad for everyone's morale. Also, acorns will keep. The boy wouldn't have. You're trying very hard to sound callous. I am callous. I'm a hedgehog. We're naturally self-centered. This was an aberration. Probably won't happen again. Gandalf smiled, even though Bramble couldn't see it. Of course, my mistake. They walked in silence for a while. Then Bramble spoke again. You did well, too. With the ring. You figured out what it was for. What do you mean? The ring doesn't make fire. Not really. It makes warmth. The kind that matters. In hearts, not hands. Like the elf said. You finally understood that. Had he? Gandalf thought about it. Círdan's words. It kindles the fire in hearts, not in the hand. He'd been trying to use Narya like a tool, like a weapon that created flame. But that wasn't its purpose. It kindled hope, encouraged courage, warmed spirits, and it worked best when combined with simple acts of goodness, like a hedgehog sharing his winter food supply, like an old wizard wrapping his cloak around a freezing child, like 2 travelers refusing to give up, even when the cold seemed absolute. I'm beginning to understand, Gandalf said, though I suspect I have much to learn still. Obviously. You're new to the body. Give it time. Tam's uncle's farm appeared as the sun began its descent toward evening, a small cluster of buildings half buried in snow. But smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. Signs of life. They knocked on the door, and it opened to reveal a stout man with a worried face that transformed to joy when he saw Tam. Tam! By all the stars, we thought you were dead. The cold came and we couldn't find you, and— He noticed Gandalf, seemed to take in the wizard's staff, the pointed hat, with a hedgehog-shaped lump in it, the general air of having traveled through magical winter. Who? A friend, Gandalf said simply. He was freezing. I brought him to you. The uncle swept Tam up in a bear hug, tears streaming down his face. Then he looked at Gandalf with gratitude so profound it was almost painful to witness. Thank you, he said. Thank you. Come in, please. Both of you. You're welcome to everything we have. Inside, the farmhouse was warm and welcoming. Tam was immediately wrapped in blankets and placed by the fire while his aunt fussed over him with hot soup. Gandalf was given a seat, food, and more thanks than he knew what to do with. Bramble, once the initial commotion had died down, cautiously emerged from the hat. The aunt shrieked, but Tam spoke up. "That's Bramble. He's nice. He gave me acorns." After some explanation, and a demonstration of Bramble's ability to speak, which caused further shrieking, the hedgehog was accepted, if not entirely understood, as part of the household for the evening. They shared a meal. The uncle asked about the unnatural winter, and Gandalf explained what he knew, that dark magic was at work, that he was trying to stop it, that there was a frozen village to the south that needed help. "I can't melt the ice," Gandalf admitted. "Not yet, but I'm learning, and I won't stop trying." "That's all anyone can ask," the uncle said. "That you try." Later, when Tam had been put to bed and Gandalf sat by the fire with Bramble in his lap, the hedgehog spoke quietly. "Your acorns are by your pack." The aunt insisted on replacing them, with interest. "You now have twice as many as I started with." That was kind of her. Practical. Hedgehogs need winter supplies. She understood that. Bramble paused. "But yes, kind." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn. Outside, the unnatural winter continued. The frozen village remained trapped. The source of the dark magic still lurked in the north. But one child was alive who would have died. One family was whole who would have been broken. One small victory against the cold. "It's not enough," Gandalf said quietly. "One child saved, thousands more trapped. It's not enough." "No," Bramble agreed. "But it's something, and something is always better than nothing, even if it's just acorns and kindness." Gandalf looked down at the hedgehog. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You're just slow to notice. Must be the new body. Probably still adjusting." Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the impossible task ahead, Gandalf laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. And in the fire, Narya caught the light and gleamed, as if it too was pleased, because that's what the ring was for. Not grand gestures or mighty magics, but small kindnesses, simple acts of giving, one spark at a time, kindling warmth in the coldest dark. That was its purpose, and Gandalf at last was beginning to understand. They left the farm at first light, despite the uncle's protests that they should rest longer, that the cold was too dangerous, that whatever lay north was surely too terrible to face. "That may be," Gandalf said as he wrapped his cloak tight and settled his pointed hat, with Bramble already nestled inside, firmly on his head. "But terrible things do not become less terrible by being ignored, and the longer we wait, the more people suffer." The uncle pressed a bundle of food into Gandalf's hands. Bread, cheese, dried meat, and a generous supply of nuts for Bramble. "Then go with what blessings we can give. And thank you, for Tam, for everything." Gandalf clasped the man's hand. "Take care of him. And if the ice begins to spread this way, go south. Get as far from here as you can." "You think it will spread?" "I think whatever causes it is growing stronger. Until I stop it, nowhere is truly safe." They set out into the pre-dawn gray, following the path north that Gandalf's instincts told him was right. The cold was worse here, deeper, more malevolent. With every mile they traveled, the temperature dropped and the landscape became more alien. "I don't like this," Bramble muttered from the hat. "This feels wrong, more wrong than before." "I agree," Gandalf said, his breath coming in thick clouds. "We're getting closer to the source, whatever it is. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No, just prepared." The sun rose, or tried to. The light that filtered through the heavy clouds was wan and gray, providing illumination but no warmth. The snow here was different too, Gandalf noticed. It had a faint bluish tinge, and when he touched it with his staff, it didn't compress normally. It felt almost alive, aware. "This isn't natural snow," he said. "We established that days ago," Bramble replied. "This is magic snow, evil snow, the worst kind of snow." "Yes, but I mean it's more than just magically created weather. This snow is part of whatever's causing the winter. It's an extension of it, like fingers reaching out from a hand." "That's a disturbing metaphor." "It's an accurate one." They crested a hill and stopped. Below them stretched a valley that had once surely been beautiful, but now it was a nightmare landscape of ice and shadow. The entire valley floor was covered in what looked like black ice. Not the clear ice of a frozen lake, but something darker, shot through with veins of deeper darkness that pulsed with sickly light. And in the center of the valley, rising from the ice like a terrible monument, was a tower. It wasn't stone or wood or any material Gandalf recognized. It appeared to be made entirely of ice, but ice so dark it was almost black. The tower spiraled upward in impossible angles, its surface crawling with those same veins of dark light. Just looking at it made Gandalf's eyes hurt and his soul recoil. "That's bad," Bramble said unnecessarily. "That's very, very bad." "That's where the winter is coming from," Gandalf said. "I can feel it. All of it. The cold, the malice, the despair. It's radiating from that tower." "So we go around it? Maybe find a nice warm valley going the opposite direction?" "You know we can't do that." "I do know that. I was just hoping you'd temporarily lost your mind and would agree with me." Gandalf began descending toward the valley. With each step the cold intensified. His joints ached, his beard stiffened with frost. Even Narya's warmth seemed muted here, struggling against the oppressive chill. They'd reached the edge of the black ice when Bramble spoke again, his voice small and worried. "Gandalf, I think we're being watched." Gandalf stopped, his hand tightening on his staff. He looked around but saw nothing, just the ice, the snow, the tower in the distance. Then he saw the shadows. They weren't natural shadows, not the absence of light, but something more. Shapes that moved independently of any light source, sliding across the ice toward them with predatory intent. As they drew closer, Gandalf could make out forms within the darkness. Vaguely humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that dragged on the ground and heads that tilted at impossible angles. "Shadow creatures," Gandalf breathed. "Servants of whatever dwells in that tower. Can we fight them? I don't know. I've never fought anything before, not in this body." "Well, you're about to learn." Bramble's voice rose in pitch as the shadows surrounded them, cutting off any retreat. "Do something wizardly. Staff blast them, ring, fire them, something." Gandalf raised his staff, trying to summon power, trying to remember how this was supposed to work. In his former life, in Valinor, he had wielded light that could unmake darkness. But here, in this mortal flesh, with these clumsy hands, a shadow lunged. Gandalf swung his staff instinctively, and to his surprise it connected. The shadow recoiled with a sound like wind through a graveyard, its form dispersing briefly before reforming. "Ha!" Bramble cheered. "You hit it! Do it again!" But there were too many. The shadows pressed closer from all sides, and Gandalf found himself backing up, swinging his staff wildly to keep them at bay. Each hit dispersed a shadow temporarily, but they always reformed. They were testing him, he realized, learning his limits and finding them disappointingly low. One shadow got past his guard and touched his arm. Pain lanced through him. Not physical pain, but something deeper. It was the pain of despair, of hope dying, of warmth being leached away. Gandalf cried out and stumbled back. "Gandalf!" Bramble scrambled out of the hat despite the danger. "The ring! Use the ring!" "I'm trying. Try harder!" Gandalf focused on Narya, calling to it desperately. The ring responded with warmth, but the shadows seemed to drink it in, to feed on it. Everywhere the ring's light touched, the shadows grew darker, stronger. "It's not working!" Gandalf gasped as another shadow raked across his back. "The light is making them worse." "Then use something else. Use... Bramble looked around frantically, then his eyes fixed on something. "The tower! Look at the tower!" Gandalf glanced toward the black ice tower and saw what Bramble meant. At its peak, a figure stood, tall, robed in shadow, with eyes that burned with cold blue fire, and it was laughing. The sound rolled across the valley like an avalanche, deep, cruel, ancient. It was the laugh of something that had seen civilizations rise and fall, that had watched hope kindle and die 1,000 times, that knew with absolute certainty that all warmth eventually failed. "Little wizard?" The voice boomed, and it felt like ice forming in Gandalf's lungs. "Little spark, did you think you could challenge winter itself? Did you think your small flame could stand against the eternal cold?" Gandalf tried to respond, but a shadow struck him across the chest, and he went down hard on the black ice. His staff flew from his grip, skittering away across the frozen surface. "I am Morgrog," the figure declared. "The Everfrost, the last winter. I was old when your precious valor were young. I dwelt in the void before the world was made, and I will be here long after the last warmth has died." The shadows converged on Gandalf, pinning him to the ice. Their touch was agony, not burning but the opposite. The pain of everything vital being frozen, crystallized, stopped. Through the pain, Gandalf saw Bramble, tiny, brave, foolish Bramble, scrambling across the ice toward his staff. "No," Gandalf tried to say. "Bramble, run, save yourself." But the hedgehog either didn't hear or didn't care. He reached the staff and, with strength that shouldn't have been possible for something so small, began dragging it back toward Gandalf. A shadow noticed. It turned toward the hedgehog, and Gandalf felt his heart, his new, mortal, vulnerable heart, clench with fear. "Leave him alone," he shouted, finding strength he didn't know he had. "He's nothing to you. Just leave him alone." "Nothing?" Morgrog's voice was amused. "You're right. He is nothing. And yet you care for him. How quaint, how mortal, how weak." The shadow reached for Bramble, and Gandalf, for the first time since arriving in Middle-earth, felt something other than uncertainty. He felt rage, pure, bright, burning rage at the injustice of it, at the cruelty, at this ancient evil that thought to harm one small, brave hedgehog simply because it could. Narya blazed on his finger, not with the gentle warmth he'd been trying to coax from it, but with something fiercer, something that remembered what it was to stand against the darkness not with overwhelming power, but with sheer stubborn refusal to yield. The shadows pinning Gandalf recoiled, hissing like water on hot metal. Gandalf rose to his feet, his hand outstretched toward Bramble. "Come here!" The hedgehog, staff forgotten, ran toward him. Gandalf scooped him up and held him close, and around them both, Narya's light formed a sphere, not bright enough to hurt the eyes, but warm enough to keep the shadows at bay. "Interesting," Morgrog said. "You found your anger. Good. Anger burns bright, but it also burns out quickly, and I am eternal." The ancient ice spirit raised his arms, and the shadows multiplied. Dozens became hundreds. They pressed against Gandalf's protective sphere, testing it, wearing it down. "This isn't going to hold," Gandalf said, feeling the strain of maintaining the barrier. "There are too many." Then we run, Bramble said. Fight another day. Live to try again. Run where? We're surrounded. So we go through them, fast. Bramble, do you trust me? Gandalf looked down at the small hedgehog, remembering the acorns, the loyalty, the constant sarcastic companionship that had kept him sane through all of this. Yes, he said, I trust you. Then when I say run, you run, as fast as you can. Don't stop, don't look back, just run. What are you going to do? Bramble's small face was set with determination. Something probably very stupid, but also very brave. Now, run! Gandalf ran. He ran toward the edge of the valley, toward the safety of the hills beyond, his feet slipping on the black ice, his lungs burning with the cold. Behind him, he heard Morgrog's laughter and the hiss of pursuing shadows. He didn't look back, not even when he heard Bramble's small, defiant voice shouting something that sounded like a battle cry, not even when the night behind him suddenly blazed with light, warm, golden light that was nothing like the cold illumination of the ice tower. Not until he'd cleared the valley and climbed halfway up the hill did Gandalf finally stop, gasping, and turn to look. The valley was in chaos. The sphere of light he'd left behind had expanded, grown, and somehow, impossibly, Bramble was at its center. The small hedgehog stood on Gandalf's dropped staff, his spines blazing with reflected light from Narya, which he must have somehow taken from Gandalf during their escape. The hedgehog had stolen his ring and was using it. "Bramble!" Gandalf shouted, starting back down the hill. "No, you can't. The ring will—" But whatever he was going to say was lost in the roar as Bramble did something that should have been impossible for a creature so small. He challenged winter itself, and for one brief shining moment, he won. The light emanating from the valley was so bright that Gandalf had to shield his eyes. It wasn't the harsh glare of lightning or the blinding flash of fire. It was the warm, golden luminescence of a summer afternoon, concentrated into one impossible moment. At its center stood Bramble. The hedgehog had somehow wedged Narya onto one of his front paws. The ring was far too large for him, hanging loosely, but it was there, and from it poured power that should have incinerated something so small, so mortal, so utterly unprepared for such magic. But Bramble didn't incinerate. Instead, he seemed to grow, not in physical size, but in presence. His small form cast a shadow that stretched across the entire valley. His spines, usually mere defenses against predators, now glowed like tiny suns. And his voice, when he spoke, carried across the frozen wasteland with surprising authority. "Oh, aye!" Bramble shouted at the shadow-wreathed figure of Morgrog. "Yeah, you, Iceface, you want to know what I think about eternal winter?" "You dare." Morgrog's voice was no longer amused. It was shocked, outraged that something so insignificant would challenge him. "I think it's boring," Bramble continued. "No beetles, no warm logs to sleep under, no acorns. Winter is the worst season, and eternal winter is the worst idea, and I'm tired of being cold." The shadows that had been pursuing Gandalf now turned back toward this new, impossible threat. They rushed at Bramble from all sides, hundreds of them, their forms howling with rage. And Bramble, standing on Gandalf's staff like a general on a battlefield, raised his small paw with Narya blazing on it. "Also," he said conversationally, "I've decided something. You can't have my giant." The light exploded outward. It didn't burn the shadows. That would have been too simple. Instead, it did something more fundamental. It reminded them what they'd once been, before they'd become servants of cold and darkness. It showed them summer sun and spring rain and autumn harvest and everything warm and living and good that they'd forgotten. The shadows didn't just disperse, they dissolved, breaking apart like morning mist, their tortured howls fading into something that sounded almost like relief. Morgrog roared, a sound like glaciers calving, like mountains splitting with frost. "Impossible! You are nothing, an insect, a mote of dust." "Yeah," Bramble agreed, and somehow his small voice carried over the ancient evil's rage. "I am nothing. I'm a hedgehog who likes beetles and warm places to sleep. I'm not wise, I'm not powerful, I'm not important." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was fierce with love and loyalty, and the stubborn courage of small things that refuse to yield. "But I'm his nothing. I'm Gandalf's hedgehog, and if you want to hurt him, you have to go through me first." With that declaration, Bramble did something that would be talked about in elven songs for ages to come, though few would believe it. A hedgehog, no bigger than an apple, weighing less than a good stone, charged an ancient spirit of ice and winter. He hopped off the staff, leaving it behind, and ran toward the tower of black ice with Narya bouncing on his paw and determination burning brighter than any magic. "Bramble, no!" Gandalf was running now, sliding down the hill in his desperation to reach the valley. "Stop! The ring will consume you. You're not meant to." But Bramble either couldn't hear him or had moved beyond hearing. The hedgehog reached the base of the tower and did the only thing a hedgehog knows how to do when confronted with something too large to fight. He curled into a ball and rolled. Narya's light concentrated, focused into a single point. Bramble, now a sphere of spines and magic and impossible courage, rolled at the tower's foundation with all the force his small body could muster. It should have been useless. It should have been the equivalent of throwing a pebble at a mountain. But the ring remembered. It remembered what it had been forged for in the elder days when the world was young. It remembered the warmth of the sun before shadow came. It remembered joy and hope and the stubborn persistence of life against all odds, and it recognized, in this small hedgehog's act of defiant love, something worth kindling. Where Bramble struck the tower, a crack appeared, small, hairline, barely visible, but it was there, and from it, warmth began to seep out, not flowing in as one might expect, but out, because Bramble had brought summer with him, had carried it in his small heart, in his complaints about the cold, in his insistence that beetles and warm logs mattered. The crack spread. "No!" Morgrog's voice was no longer confident. It was afraid. "That is not possible. I am eternal. I am winter itself. You cannot." The tower cracked again, louder this time, and Bramble, still curled in his defensive ball, still glowing with borrowed power, rolled along the base of the tower in a circle, leaving warmth in his wake. More cracks appeared, spread, connected. "Bramble!" Gandalf had reached the valley floor now, was running across the black ice toward his friend. "Let go of the ring. You have to let go. It will kill you." But Bramble completed his circuit around the tower's base and finally stopped, uncurling slowly. He was smoking slightly, his spine singed, his small body trembling with exhaustion. But he was alive, and the tower was falling. The black ice that had seemed eternal, unbreakable, was coming apart. Great chunks of it calved away, crashing to the valley floor and shattering. The veins of dark light that had pulsed through it were fading, going out like candles in wind. At the tower's peak, Morgrog stood amid the destruction of his domain. For the first time, Gandalf could see him clearly, not robed in shadows, not hidden behind winter's mask, just an old, tired spirit who had been fighting a losing battle since the world began. "How?" the ice spirit asked, and his voice was no longer terrible, just confused, hurt. "How did such a small thing defeat me?" "Because you forgot." Gandalf said, arriving at Bramble's side and gently removing Narya from the hedgehog's paw. The ring was hot to the touch, still blazing with power. You forgot that size doesn't measure courage, that strength isn't always about power, that sometimes the smallest gestures matter most. He looked down at Bramble, who was trying very hard to stay conscious. And you forgot that love makes us brave, even when we're terrified, even when we're outmatched, even when we're just a hedgehog standing between the darkness and someone we care about. The tower collapsed entirely then, falling inward in a cascade of melting ice. Morgrog didn't try to escape. He simply stood there as his domain crumbled around him, as the eternal winter he'd spent ages building came apart in minutes. As the last of the tower fell, the ice spirit looked at Gandalf and Bramble one final time. "I am defeated," he said, "but I am not destroyed. Winter will always exist. Cold will always come. I cannot be truly ended, only quieted for a time." "I know," Gandalf said. "Winter has its place, its time, but not eternal winter, not winter that kills hope. That's not natural. That's not right. Then you have won, for now." Morgrog's form began to dissipate, becoming mist, becoming memory. "But I will return, perhaps in a century, perhaps in 10. When warmth grows weak and hearts grow cold, I will come again. And we'll be here," Bramble croaked from where he lay on the ice. "Me and my giant, ready to roll at you again. Fair warning, something that might have been a laugh echoed across the valley. I believe you would, small one. I believe you would." Then Morgrog was gone, and with him the unnatural winter began to break. Gandalf could feel it, like a dam bursting, like chains snapping. The oppressive cold that had gripped the land for days was releasing its hold. The black ice beneath them was already melting, becoming ordinary water. The clouds overhead were breaking apart, revealing blue sky, actual summer sky, for the first time in what felt like forever. "We did it," Gandalf said wonderingly. "Bramble, we actually did it. We stopped the winter." "You're welcome," Bramble managed. "Can I pass out now? I feel like I've earned a good pass out." No, stay awake. Talk to me. How do you feel?" "Like I challenged an ancient spirit of winter and won, which is to say, terrible. Everything hurts. Did you know your ring is really heavy? For a hedgehog, I mean. Very inconsiderate design. Should complain to the manufacturer." Gandalf laughed, partly from relief, partly from the sheer absurdity of receiving design critique from a hedgehog about one of the great rings of power. "I'll be sure to mention that to the elves who forged it. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." He scooped up Bramble gently, cradling the small singed hedgehog in his hands. Bramble's spines were dull now, no longer glowing, and several had been burned away entirely. His small nose was soot-stained, and he was shaking with exhaustion. But he was alive. They'd both survived. Against impossible odds, against ancient evil, a wizard who barely knew his power, and a hedgehog who'd never been in a fight before, had won. Not through overwhelming force, not through ancient wisdom, but through stubbornness, courage, and the simple refusal to let someone they cared about face darkness alone. As Gandalf climbed out of the valley, carrying his brave companion, the sun broke through the clouds completely. Warmth, real warmth, summer warmth, flooded across the land. Snow began to melt, ice began to crack, and somewhere to the south, in a frozen village, people trapped in magical stasis began, very slowly, to stir. "Bramble," Gandalf said softly as they walked, "that was the most foolish, reckless, idiotic thing anyone has ever done." "I know," the hedgehog mumbled, half asleep already. "It was also the bravest. I know that too. Thank you for saving me, for standing with me, for being exactly who you are. You're welcome. Can I live in your hat forever? I've earned it. You can live in my hat for as long as you want. Good. It's a nice hat. Roomy, warm, excellent hat architecture. 5 stars. High praise indeed. Don't let it go to your head, which, speaking of heads, I'm going to sleep on now. Your head. Wake me when there's food and no more ancient evils. Deal. Bramble closed his small eyes and, within seconds, was snoring softly in Gandalf's hands. The wizard continued walking, following the path south toward the frozen village, toward the people who needed help, toward whatever came next. Behind him, the valley was already beginning to green. Grass was pushing through the melting snow. Birds that had fled the unnatural cold were returning, their songs tentative at first, then joyful. Winter was ending, summer was returning, and a wizard and his hedgehog had made it happen. Not through power, through love. And sometimes Gandalf was learning that was the most powerful magic of all. The journey back to the frozen village took most of the day, though the landscape was transforming around them with every passing hour. Snow melted into streams, ice cracked and fell away from trees. Flowers that had been frozen mid-bloom began to revive, their petals uncurling in the returning warmth. It was like watching spring arrive in fast motion, and it filled Gandalf with a hope he hadn't felt since arriving in Middle-earth. Bramble slept through most of it, nestled in Gandalf's hat where he'd been carefully placed. The hedgehog stirred occasionally, muttering things like "no more towers" and "need beetles" before falling back into exhausted slumber. Gandalf didn't wake him. The small creature had earned his rest 100 times over. As they walked, Gandalf found himself reflecting on what had happened. He had been sent to Middle-earth as a guardian, a warrior against darkness, someone who would stand against evil with power and wisdom. And yet when the moment came, when he'd faced an ancient terror, he'd been helpless. It had been Bramble, small, imperfect, hedgehog Bramble, who'd found the strength to act. The thought was humbling and instructive. Perhaps power wasn't what he'd thought it was. Perhaps being a wizard in this world didn't mean wielding overwhelming force. Perhaps it meant something else entirely. Something about courage and sacrifice and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win, even when victory seemed impossible. He was still pondering this when they crested the final hill and saw the village below. It was changed. The ice that had encased every building, every person, was cracking. Not quickly, not the sudden collapse of Morgrog's tower, but steadily, inevitably, like a glacier in spring. And through the translucent walls of their frozen prison, Gandalf could see the villagers moving, just slightly, fingers twitching, eyes blinking, life returning. But the process was slow, too slow. At this rate, it would take days for them to fully thaw, and Gandalf could sense that the magic still clung to them, reluctant to release its grip entirely. They needed help. They needed. "You need to finish it," Bramble said sleepily from the hat. Gandalf looked up in surprise. "You're awake. Hard to sleep through all your loud thinking. You think very loudly. It's disruptive." Bramble's small face appeared at the brim of the hat, looking tired but alert. "The ice is breaking, but not fast enough. They're still trapped, still scared. You need to do what you did before. Warm their hearts." "I tried that once. It helped, but it wasn't enough to free them. That was before we beat Morgrog, before you understood what the ring really does." Bramble's nose twitched thoughtfully. "You're different now, stronger. Not in power, but in confidence, I suppose. You know you can do this." "Do I?" "Yes, you're just being stubborn about admitting it. very wizard-like, very tiresome. Despite his anxiety, Gandalf smiled. "And here I thought you were going to be encouraging." "I'm being realistic. Encouragement is overrated. What you need is someone to tell you to stop overthinking and just do the thing, so stop overthinking, do the thing." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Gandalf looked at the village again, at the people trapped between ice and freedom. Bramble was right. He was different now. He'd faced ancient evil and survived. He'd witnessed a hedgehog challenge winter itself. He'd learned that magic wasn't about force, but about the warmth you brought to cold places. It was time to finish what he'd started. "Stay here," Gandalf said, carefully removing his hat and setting it on a sheltered rock with Bramble still inside. "Rest. I'll return shortly." "You'd better. I'm growing attached to that hat. Would hate to have to find a new one." Gandalf descended into the village alone, his staff clicking against the melting ice with each step. As he walked, he felt Narya warming on his finger, not hot, not blazing, just ready, patient, waiting for him to understand how to use it properly. He reached the village center, where the frozen woman he'd first tried to help still stood, her hand outstretched toward a door she'd never reached. Around her, dozens more villagers were trapped in similar poses, lives interrupted, moments frozen, but they were aware. He could feel it now, more clearly than before. Their minds were active behind the ice, waiting, hoping, terrified that this half-thawed state might be all they ever got. Gandalf planted his staff in the ground and held up his hand with Narya glowing on it. "People of this village," he said, and his voice carried through the ice, through the fear, to the trapped minds within. "I know you can hear me. I know you're frightened. But the winter is ending. The evil that held you has been defeated. All that remains is this ice, and ice cannot stand against summer." He felt them respond, not with words, but with the faint stirring of hope. "But you must help me," Gandalf continued. "I can warm the air, but you must warm yourselves. Remember summer. Remember sunlight on your faces. Remember harvest festivals and warm bread and the laughter of children. Remember everything you love about warmth and life and light. Hold those memories. Feed them. Let them kindle inside you like small flames." The ring pulsed on his finger, and Gandalf drew deeply on its power, not forcing it, not commanding it, but asking, gently, respectfully, the way you'd ask a friend for help. Narya responded. Light spread from the ring, not the brilliant explosion that Bramble had conjured, but something softer, gentler. The light of dawn, not lightning. It flowed through the village like warm wind, touching each frozen person, each trapped soul. And inside them, Gandalf felt the response. One by one, the villagers began to remember. A woman thought of her daughter's smile. A man recalled the taste of his wife's soup. A child remembered playing in summer rain. Small things, simple things, but warm things. And warmth, once kindled, grows. The ice began to crack in earnest now, not just surface cracks, but deep fractures that spread and multiplied. The magic that had held it together was losing its grip, overwhelmed by the combined warmth of dozens of hearts, all remembering summer at once. Gandalf poured more power into the ring, but not his power, their power. He was just the conduit, the kindling point. The real magic was coming from the people themselves, from their stubborn refusal to let winter be the end of their story. "That's it," he said encouragingly. "Keep going. You're almost free. Just a little more." The woman in front of him, the first one he'd tried to help, moved her fingers. Just slightly, but it was movement, real, voluntary movement. Then more movement, an arm lowering, a head turning, eyes blinking away ice crystals. All around the village, People were stirring, breaking free. The ice that had held them for days was shattering, falling away in sheets, melting into puddles that reflected the summer sky above. Gandalf felt the moment when the magic broke entirely, when the last grip of Morgrog's curse released and the people were truly, fully free. It was like a chain snapping, a door opening, a breath held too long finally released. The villagers staggered, gasping, many falling to their knees, but they were alive, moving, free. For a long moment there was silence as everyone processed what had happened. Then a child, perhaps 8 years old, who'd been frozen mid-run, looked up at Gandalf and said, "You came back. You promised you'd come back, and you did." "Of course I did," Gandalf said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't break promises." The child ran to him and hugged his leg with surprising strength. Others followed, not all at once, but gradually. The villagers approached this strange old wizard who'd saved them, their faces showing wonder and gratitude and relief. "Thank you," the woman said, the one who'd been reaching for her door. "Thank you. We were so afraid. We thought that was how we'd die. Frozen, aware but unable to move, forever. You're safe now," Gandalf assured her. "The winter is broken. The evil that caused it is defeated. You can rebuild. You can live again." "Who are you?" a man asked. "Are you one of the elves, or something else?" "I am Gandalf," he said, and this time the name felt right, not strange, not borrowed, but his. "I am a wizard, a traveler, a friend, I hope." "You're a hero," the child said with absolute certainty, "like in the stories." Gandalf looked down at the boy and thought of Bramble, sleeping in a hat on a rock outside the village, thought of how terrified he'd been, how helpless he'd felt, thought of all the times he'd failed and fumbled and nearly given up. "No," he said gently, "not a hero, just someone who was in the right place at the right time, with the right friends to help him. That's all anyone needs to be." They wanted him to stay. The villagers were insistent about it. They had questions, needed guidance, wanted to celebrate their freedom. But Gandalf, mindful of his exhausted companion waiting outside the village, promised to return in a few days once they'd had time to recover. "Right now," he said, "I need to check on my friend. He's the real hero of this story, and he deserves to rest somewhere warm." As he climbed back up the hill to where he'd left his hat, Gandalf felt something shift inside him. A settling, a sense of rightness that had been missing since he'd arrived in Middle-earth. He'd been sent here to stand against the darkness, to be a guardian, a helper, a force for good. And today, finally, he'd done that. Not with overwhelming power, not with ancient wisdom, but with simple, stubborn compassion, with the refusal to give up, with the willingness to try, even when success seemed impossible. That was what being a wizard meant, he realized. Not the magic, not the staff or the ring or the fancy robes. It meant showing up, trying, caring enough to act even when you were afraid. Everything else was just decoration. Bramble was exactly where Gandalf had left him, curled in the hat, snoring softly. The hedgehog stirred when Gandalf picked up the hat, one eye opening blearily. "Is it done?" Bramble mumbled. "It's done. They're free." "Good. Can we eat now? I'm starving. Fighting ancient evil works up an appetite." They made camp in a small grove not far from the village, where the trees provided shelter and the grass was dry enough to sit on. Gandalf built a proper fire, still using flint and steel. But the process was faster now, more confident, and they shared a meal from the supplies the farmer had given them. Bramble devoured his portion of nuts with enthusiasm, occasionally pausing to complain that they weren't beetles but would suffice in a pinch. "You know," Gandalf said as they ate, I haven't properly thanked you. For what? For saving my life, for being brave when I was paralyzed with fear, for stealing my ring and challenging an ancient spirit of winter. Oh, that! Bramble looked somewhat embarrassed, which on a hedgehog mostly involved his spines flattening slightly. Well, you needed help. I helped. That's what friends do. It was more than help. It was heroism. It was stupidity. I had no idea what I was doing. I just saw those shadow things hurting you and I got angry. Bramble paused. I've never been angry before. Not really. It's quite exhausting. But you acted anyway, despite being afraid, despite not knowing if it would work. That's the definition of courage. If you say so. Can we talk about something else? All this heroism discussion is making me uncomfortable. I'm a hedgehog. We're supposed to be small and forgettable and focused on beetles, not whatever that was. Gandalf smiled and reached down to gently pat Bramble's small head. You're not small, not where it counts, and you're definitely not forgettable. Your fingers smell like cheese. That's because we just ate cheese. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn. The evening was warm, properly warm, summer warm, and the sky above was clear. Stars were beginning to appear, those ancient lights that had witnessed the world's beginning and would witness its ending, indifferent and eternal. Gandalf? Bramble said eventually. Yes. When Morgrog said he'd come back someday, did he mean it? Gandalf considered the question. Yes, he meant it. Winter will always exist. Cold will always come. Morgrog he's part of the world, in his way. We defeated him, but we didn't destroy him. That may not even be possible. So we'll have to fight him again? Perhaps, in 100 years, in 1,000, when the world grows cold again and hearts lose hope. Gandalf looked down at his companion. Does that frighten you? Terrifies me. I'm terrible at fighting. Today was mostly luck and panic. That's not true. It's completely true. I had no plan. I just rolled at a tower and hoped something good would happen. That's not strategy. That's chaos. But it worked. This time. Might not work next time. If there is a next time, which apparently there will be. Bramble sighed, a surprisingly melancholy sound from such a small creature. I thought when we beat him, that would be the end, that we'd won forever. But that's not how it works, is it? No, Gandalf said gently. It's not. Darkness always returns in some form. The world is built that way, light and shadow, warmth and cold, hope and despair. They balance each other. We can't eliminate one without destroying the other. That seems like poor design. Perhaps, but it's the design we have, and it means there will always be work to do, always people who need help, always winters that need ending. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also purposeful. We matter because the work matters, because without us, without everyone who chooses to stand against the cold, winter would win, the darkness would spread until nothing warm remained. Bramble was quiet for a long moment, then, so we just keep going, keep fighting, even though we know it's never really over? Yes, that's exactly what we do. And you're okay with that? Gandalf thought about it, really thought about it. When he'd first arrived in Middle-earth, he'd imagined his mission would be simple. Arrive, defeat evil, mission accomplished. But nothing was that simple. Life was messy and complicated and full of small victories that led to more struggles. But that didn't make the victories meaningless. I'm okay with it, he said finally, because the alternative is giving up, letting the darkness win, and I've discovered something these past few days. What's that? I'm very stubborn, and apparently so are you. which means the darkness doesn't stand a chance. Bramble made a sound that might have been a laugh. Your logic is questionable, but I appreciate the confidence. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between friends who don't need to fill every moment with words. Eventually, Bramble stood and stretched, his spines rustling. I'm going to sleep now, properly sleep, not passed out from fighting ancient evil sleep, but actual restful sleep, in my hat, which is warm and comfortable and has excellent architecture. It's your hat now, is it? I earned it. I saved your life. The hat is payment. Very reasonable exchange rate. I can't argue with that logic. Good. Learning. Bramble waddled toward the hat, then paused. Gandalf? Yes? I'm glad you sat on my house that day, at the Grey Havens, even though it was rude and I was trying to sleep. I'm glad too. We make a good team for a wizard and a hedgehog. We make an excellent team. Don't let it go to your head. Too late. Bramble climbed into the hat and, within moments, was snoring softly. Gandalf tended the fire a while longer, then lay down himself, using his cloak as a blanket and his pack as a pillow. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sounds of the village celebrating their freedom, voices raised in song, laughter carrying on the warm evening air. And Gandalf, for the first time since arriving in Middle-earth, felt at peace. He'd faced darkness and survived. He'd discovered what his power was truly meant for. He'd learned that strength came in many forms, and sometimes the smallest hearts burned brightest. Tomorrow, there would be more to do, more people to help, more darkness to face. But tonight, there was warmth. There was safety. There was a hedgehog snoring in his hat and stars overhead, and the promise that summer would always return, no matter how long the winter. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Gandalf closed his eyes, and for the first time in his new mortal life, slept deeply and without worry. In his dreams, he walked through summer meadows where no shadow fell, and beside him walked a small hedgehog complaining about the lack of beetles. Even in dreams, some things never changed. And that, Gandalf decided, was exactly as it should be. Morning arrived with birdsong. Dozens of different species, all celebrating the return of summer with enthusiastic volume. Gandalf woke to sunlight on his face and the distinct feeling that something small and prickly was sitting on his chest. He opened his eyes to find Bramble perched there, staring at him intently. "You snore," the hedgehog announced. "Very loudly. It's disruptive. I was trying to hunt beetles and your snoring scared them away." "Good morning to you too," Gandalf said, carefully sitting up and depositing Bramble onto the grass beside him. "Did you sleep well?" "Remarkably well, actually. The hat is an excellent sleeping accommodation. 5 stars. Would recommend." Bramble stretched, his spines rustling. "Also, I found 7 beetles. 3 were excellent quality. 2 were acceptable. 1 was frankly disappointing, and 1 ran away before I could properly evaluate it. A productive morning, then." "Very. And now we should probably return to the village. They're awake and making a lot of noise. Celebratory noise, I think, but noise nonetheless." Indeed, as Gandalf listened, he could hear sounds drifting from the village. Voices, laughter, the ring of hammers on wood. The sounds of life resuming after the long freeze. They broke camp and walked down to the village, Gandalf with his staff and his pointed hat, containing Bramble in his preferred traveling position, looking every bit the wandering wizard he was supposed to be. The village had transformed overnight. Where yesterday there had been ice and fear, today there was activity and hope. People were out in force, repairing roofs damaged by the weight of snow, clearing away the last remnants of ice, tending to gardens that had somehow survived the freeze. Children ran through the streets, their laughter bright and unrestrained. Flowers were blooming, not just surviving, but thriving, as if trying to make up for lost time. And everywhere, people wore expressions of relief and joy. They noticed Gandalf immediately. "It's him!" the child from yesterday called out. "The wizard! He came back!" A crowd gathered quickly, and Gandalf found himself surrounded by grateful villagers, all talking at once, all trying to thank him, to offer him food and shelter and anything he might need. "Please," he said, raising his hand for quiet. "Please, I'm glad you're all safe, but I can't take credit for your freedom. You freed yourselves. I merely encouraged you. You saved us," the woman who'd been reaching for her door said firmly. Her name, Gandalf had learned, was Mara. "Without you, we'd still be trapped, or worse." "The hedgehog helped too," the child, whose name was Pip, said helpfully. "The brave hedgehog in the hat." All eyes turned upward to Gandalf's hat, where Bramble's small face was just visible in the brim. "Hello," Bramble said with as much dignity as a hedgehog could muster. "Yes, I helped. You're welcome. Also, do any of you have beetles? I'm conducting a survey of local beetle quality and would appreciate samples." There was a moment of stunned silence, then Pip burst into delighted laughter. "The hedgehog talks." "Of course I talk. I'm very sophisticated, also very hungry. The beetle situation in this region is frankly substandard." That broke the tension, and soon everyone was laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from relief, from survival, from the sheer joy of being alive and warm and free. Mara organized a celebration for that evening. Nothing fancy, just shared food and drink and the chance to be together without fear. Gandalf and Bramble were guests of honor, though Bramble insisted he was really only attending for the food. During the day, Gandalf walked through the village, talking with the survivors, listening to their stories of the freeze. Some had been conscious the entire time, trapped and aware. Others had drifted in and out of something like sleep. All of them had felt his presence when he'd spoken to them, felt the warmth of Narya reaching through the ice. "We held on to your words," an elderly man told him. "Remembered summer, like you said. My wife," he gestured to the woman beside him. "She thought of our wedding day, the sun on her face, the flowers. It kept her warm inside, even when everything outside was cold." "That's all you needed," Gandalf said gently. "The warmth was always inside you. I just reminded you it was there." As the day progressed, Gandalf noticed something remarkable. The village wasn't just recovering, it was thriving. Plants were growing faster than they should. Flowers were blooming in colors more vibrant than normal. Even the people seemed healthier, more energetic than one might expect after days of magical imprisonment. "It's the magic," Bramble observed from his hat perch as they walked through a garden that had sprouted overnight. "Your ring magic. It didn't just melt the ice, it encouraged things, life things, growth things." "Narya kindles," Gandalf said thoughtfully. "I thought it just kindled courage or hope, but perhaps it kindles all aspects of life. Growth, renewal, the will to persist and flourish." That's a very poetic way of saying your ring makes plants grow fast. Poetry is important. So are beetles, which are notably absent from this philosophical discussion. Despite his hedgehog companion's complaints, Gandalf felt a deep satisfaction. This was what he'd been sent to do, not to wield overwhelming power or destroy enemies, but to encourage life, to remind people that warmth existed even in the coldest times, to kindle the small flames that, together, held back the dark. The celebration that evening was simple but heartfelt. Tables were set up in the village square, laden with food that people had somehow conjured from pantries and cellars that had survived the freeze. There was bread and cheese, preserved fruits, smoked meats, and enough ale to ensure everyone's spirits stayed high. Gandalf sat at the center table with Mara and her family, while Bramble had his own small plate piled with nuts, seeds, and, to his delight, a handful of beetles that Pip had collected specifically for him. "These are good beetles," Bramble declared after careful consideration. 7 out of 10. Room for improvement, but acceptable. Please convey my compliments to the beetles. "I don't think that's how it works," Pip said, giggling. "Then how do compliments reach beetles? This is a serious gap in your social protocols. Very concerning." The child dissolved into laughter again, and Bramble looked pleased with himself, even if he pretended not to be. As the evening wore on and ale loosened tongues, people began asking Gandalf about himself, where he'd come from, where he was going, what other adventures he'd had. Gandalf found himself telling the truth, or as much of it as they'd understand. He'd come from far away. He was new to Middle-earth. He was still learning what it meant to be a wizard here, in this place, in this body. "So you're not all-powerful?" asked a young man who'd perhaps had a bit too much ale. "I thought wizards were supposed to be, powerful." "Power comes in many forms," Gandalf said, "and I'm discovering that the most important kind has nothing to do with magic. It's about showing up, about trying, about refusing to give up even when everything seems hopeless." "That sounds hard," the young man said. "It is, but everything worthwhile is hard. That's what makes it worthwhile." As the celebration continued, Gandalf found himself thinking about his journey so far. He'd arrived at the Grey Havens uncertain and afraid, wearing an old man's body like an ill-fitting coat. He'd stumbled through his first week, failing at simple magics, falling in snow, generally being useless. But he'd also made a friend, faced an ancient evil, saved a village, learned what Narya was truly meant for. Not bad for a first week in Middle-earth. "You're thinking loudly again," Bramble said from beside him. The hedgehog had eaten his fill and was now grooming his spines with the satisfied air of a warrior after battle. "Your face gets all scrunchy when you think." "I'm reflecting on how far we've come." "We haven't come far. We've barely gone anywhere. We're still in the same general region we started in." "I meant metaphorically." "Metaphors are overrated, also confusing. Speak plainly." "I mean, I've learned a lot. About myself. About what I'm meant to do here." "And what are you meant to do?" Gandalf looked around at the celebrating villagers, at Pip playing with friends who'd almost been lost forever, at Mara laughing with her family, at all these lives that had been saved and would continue. "This," he said simply, "help where I can. Light small fires against the dark. Give people reasons to hope." "That's a good purpose," Bramble said. "Better than just wandering around being mysteriously wizardly. Also, it comes with benefits." "What benefits?" "Villages feed you, and me. Mostly me. I have high caloric needs." "Of course you do." Later, when the celebration had wound down and people had begun drifting to their homes, Mara approached Gandalf with something wrapped in cloth. "We want you to have this," she said, handing him the bundle. "It's not much, but we wanted to give you something to remember us by." Gandalf unwrapped it carefully and found a scarf, hand-knitted soft gray wool with small stars embroidered along the edges in silver thread. "It's beautiful," he said, genuinely moved. "But I can't." "You can and you will," Mara said firmly. "You saved us. The least we can do is make sure you're warm on your journeys. Winters will come again. Natural winters, I mean. And you'll need it." "Thank you." Gandalf wrapped the scarf around his neck. It was perfectly weighted, warm but not too heavy, and the stars. The stars reminded him of home, of the lights of Elbereth that had guided him since the world began. "Will you stay?" Mara asked. "We'd be honored if you made your home here." Gandalf was tempted, truly tempted. The village was peaceful, the people kind, and after the chaos of his first week, some stability seemed appealing. But he knew he couldn't. "My road goes on," he said gently. "There are other places that need help, other villages, other people facing their own winters. I'm needed elsewhere. Will you come back? Visit us? If my path leads this way again, absolutely. And if you ever need me, if darkness comes again, send word. I'll come." "How will we send word? We don't know where you'll be." Gandalf smiled. "Tell the wind, tell the trees, tell any wizard you meet. Word has a way of reaching those who need to hear it. Somehow I'll know." They spoke a while longer, and Gandalf made his farewells to the other villagers. Pip gave him a small carved wooden hedgehog. "So you remember Bramble even when he's being grumpy," the child explained, and Gandalf tucked it carefully in his pocket alongside his pipe. Finally, as the moon rose high and stars filled the clear summer sky, Gandalf and Bramble left the village. They walked in comfortable silence, following the road east toward whatever came next. "That was nice," Bramble said after a while. "The celebration, the food, the excessive gratitude. You enjoyed being appreciated?" "I enjoyed the beetles. The appreciation was tolerable. High praise. I'm a hedgehog of simple tastes. Beetles and warm hats, that's all I require from life. And yet you challenged an ancient spirit of winter. Yes, well, that was an aberration, unlikely to happen again. We'll see." They walked through the night, the stars wheeling overhead, the warm breeze carrying scents of growing things, grass and flowers, and the rich earth smell of summer. Behind them, the village slowly faded into the distance, its lights winking out one by one as people found their beds. Gandalf felt the weight of the new scarf around his neck, the small carved hedgehog in his pocket, and the ring on his finger. Still warm, still ready, still waiting to kindle whatever flames needed kindling. He'd saved one village, helped one group of people. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. There would always be more darkness, more cold, more winters to end. But it was a start, and sometimes that's all anyone needed. A start. A small light in the darkness. A reason to keep walking. Even when the road was long and uncertain and strange, you kept walking. Because someone, somewhere, needed help, and you were a wizard, which meant showing up, trying, caring. Everything else was just decoration. The road east was well-traveled and pleasant, winding through countryside that was truly enjoying summer now. The unnatural winter was already becoming a story, a strange tale that people would tell in the years to come when the world seemed dark and cold, to remind themselves that even impossible winters could end. Gandalf and Bramble walked at an easy pace, in no particular hurry to reach any particular destination. The journey itself was the point, Gandalf had decided. Walking, observing, being present in this world he'd been sent to protect. It was mid-morning on their third day from the village when Bramble spoke up from his position in the hat. "I've been thinking." "A dangerous occupation," Gandalf said mildly. "Rude, but accurate. I've been thinking about what you said, about the road going on, about always being needed elsewhere. And I've decided I'm coming with you, permanently. Not just until we find the next warm place or good beetle supply. All the way. However long all the way is." Gandalf stopped walking. "Bramble, you don't have to." I know I don't have to. I want to. There's a difference. The hedgehog's small face appeared at the brim of the hat, looking uncharacteristically serious. You need someone to keep you from doing stupid things, like challenging ice demons alone, or trying to light fires with your face. I'm qualified for this role. You're qualified to prevent me from lighting fires with my face? Extremely qualified. Years of experience watching people do stupid things. I'm an expert in stupid thing prevention. Despite himself, Gandalf smiled. I would be honored to have you as my traveling companion for however long the road goes. Good, that's settled. Can we eat now? All this emotional honesty has made me hungry. They found a pleasant spot under an oak tree and shared lunch. Bread and cheese for Gandalf, an assortment of insects for Bramble, who rated them 6 out of 10 needs work. As they ate, Gandalf found himself watching the hedgehog with fondness. How had this small, grumpy creature become so important to him in such a short time? A week ago he'd been alone, uncertain, struggling to understand his purpose. Now he had a companion, a friend, someone who'd stood with him against impossible odds. "Stop staring at me," Bramble said without looking up from his beetle. "It's weird. I'm not staring, I'm observing. That's just staring with a fancier word. Still weird. I'm simply appreciating. You're being sentimental. Very wizard-like, very tiresome." Gandalf laughed, a sound that was becoming more natural, more frequent. "You know, when I first arrived in Middle-earth, I thought being a wizard would be about power and wisdom and great deeds. It's not? It is, but not in the way I thought. The power is in choosing to care. The wisdom is in knowing that small acts matter. And the great deeds," he gestured around them, at the summer countryside, at the road stretching ahead, at the small hedgehog finishing his lunch. "The great deeds are made of many small ones. One village saved, one child warmed, one friend gained." That's very philosophical for someone who fell face first in snow 3 days ago. I'm allowed to have grown since then, I suppose, though you're still clumsy, and your fire lighting needs work, and you think too loudly. But I'm improving? Marginally, very marginally, barely noticeable improvement. I'll take it. They finished their meal and resumed walking. The road climbed gently into hills, and from the higher ground Gandalf could see for miles. Rolling farmland, small villages, forests and streams. All the varied beauty of Middle-earth spread out like a map. Somewhere out there, darkness still existed. Morgrog would return someday. There would be other evils, other challenges, other winters to end. The Valor had sent him here for a purpose, and that purpose was far from complete, but that was fine. He had time. He had determination. He had a ring that kindled warmth in the coldest places, and he had a hedgehog in his hat. "Bramble?" he said after a while. The hedgehog sounded drowsy. "Thank you." "For what?" "For sitting under that log at the Grey Havens, for letting me sit on your house, for everything that came after." "You're welcome. Now hush, I'm trying to nap. Your head makes excellent napping conditions when you're not talking." Gandalf smiled and continued walking, his staff clicking against the road in a steady rhythm. Above him, the sky was perfectly blue, dotted with white clouds that looked like they'd been painted there for sheer joy. He thought about his pipe. He hadn't smoked in days, actually. Too busy with crises and frozen villages. Perhaps he'd stop early this evening, find a nice spot to rest, and reacquaint himself with the simple pleasure of good tobacco and time to think. "I can hear you thinking about your pipe," Bramble mumbled from the hat. "You get a specific look. It's very obvious. How can you see my look? You're in my hat. I've memorized your looks. The pipe-thinking look, the fire-trying look, The about to do something brave and stupid look. You have many looks, all of them obvious. You're very observant for someone who claims to only think about beetles. I contain multitudes. I'm complex. Also hungry again. When are we stopping? Soon. Define soon. Wizard time or hedgehog time? Because those are very different. Hedgehog time, I promise. Good. They walked on as the afternoon lengthened toward evening. Gandalf found himself humming a tune from Valinor, old beyond reckoning, that had no words but spoke of journeys and homecomings and the roads that connected them. From his hat, Bramble joined in with a small humming of his own, off-key but enthusiastic. "That's the wrong note," Gandalf said. "No, you're singing the wrong note. My note is correct. I'm a hedgehog. We have perfect pitch." "I don't think that's true." "Prove it." They debated musical theory for the next mile, neither convincing the other, both enjoying the argument more than the actual subject. Eventually, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they found a good camping spot. A grove of willows near a stream, with soft grass and the pleasant sound of running water. Gandalf built a fire, successfully on the second try, which he considered excellent progress, and they settled in for the evening. He got out his pipe, filled it with the last of his tobacco from Círdan, and lit it with a small flame from Narya. The ring responded smoothly now, understanding what he wanted, providing just enough heat. No explosions, no singed eyebrows, just a simple flame, doing its job, then fading. "Better," Bramble commented from where he sat near the fire. "You're learning, slowly, but learning. Your encouragement is overwhelming. I don't believe in false praise. It's dishonest. You're adequate at firelighting now. That's progress. From terrible to adequate, I'm moving up in the world. Don't let it go to your head." Gandalf puffed on his pipe, blowing smoke rings that actually looked like rings now, mostly. Above them, stars were beginning to appear, Elbereth's lights, ancient and constant, watching over Middle-earth with patient care. "Bramble?" Gandalf said into the comfortable silence. What do you think comes next? For us, I mean. Where does the road lead?" "East, obviously. We're going east. I mean, metaphorically." "Oh, metaphors again. Your favorite." Bramble was quiet for a moment. "I think more of the same. More walking. More villages that need help. More ancient evils that need defeating. More meals with questionable beetle quality." "That sounds exhausting." "It does. But also purposeful? Like it matters. Like we're doing something important, even if it's just helping one village at a time, one person at a time." "That's very wise." "I know. I'm very wise. Also very tired. Can we sleep now?" "Soon. I want to finish my pipe first." "Fine. But wake me if anything exciting happens." "Define exciting." "Attacking enemies. Falling into things. Your usual chaos. I want to witness it so I can complain properly." "I'll keep that in mind." Bramble curled up near the fire, his spines relaxed, his small body rising and falling with steady breaths. Within minutes, he was snoring softly. Gandalf smoked his pipe and watched the stars come out one by one. He thought about Círdan and the Grey Havens, which seemed impossibly far away now, though it had only been a week. He thought about the valor and the mission they'd given him, to walk among mortals, to kindle hope, to stand against the darkness. He thought about how frightened he'd been, arriving here, how uncertain, how convinced he was the wrong choice for this task. And he thought about everything that had happened since, the failures and the successes, the moments of terror and the moments of triumph, the friendships forged and the lessons learned. He wasn't the same wizard who'd stepped off the boat a week ago. He was still Olorin, still carried that name in his heart, But he was also Gandalf now, truly Gandalf, not just wearing the name but embodying it. The Grey Wanderer, the walker of roads, the lighter of small fires against the dark. And he had a long way still to walk. Many roads, many years, many ages perhaps. But that was all right, because he wasn't walking alone. He had a hedgehog who complained about beetles and stole rings and challenged ancient evils with nothing but stubbornness and love. He had a purpose that mattered. He had Narya, warming his finger, ready to kindle whatever flames needed kindling. And he had the stars above, constant and eternal, reminding him that light persisted even in the darkest times. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Gandalf finished his pipe as the last light faded from the sky. He tapped out the ash, carefully stowed the pipe in his pocket, next to the carved wooden hedgehog, and lay down near the fire. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance. Beside him, Bramble snored peacefully. And ahead of them, always ahead, the road went on. Through summer and winter, through light and dark, through all the years and ages to come, the road went on, and Gandalf the Grey, wizard of Middle-earth, companion to hedgehogs, lighter of fires, and tender of hope, he would walk it, for as long as it needed walking, which was to say, forever, or close enough. The fire burned low as sleep claimed the wizard and his small companion, and in the morning they would wake. They would eat breakfast, beetles for one, bread for the other. They would argue about something inconsequential, and they would continue walking, because that's what you did. You kept walking, one step at a time, one day at a time, one small kindness at a time, until the darkness was beaten back, until hope was kindled, until warmth returned to cold places. You kept walking, together, always together, down the long road that led everywhere and nowhere and home all at once. The end.